Outlander worked. It was a great story. I love it. Obviously, everyone knows I like Shroud Hat, but it kind of relies on you having at least seen like the first film. Like you kind
Mm.
of have a vibe of what Tatooine's about going into it. It explains itself well, but it's playing to what you already know in that sense. Um, and then this
Yeah.
story feels like it's crafted with intention, and this
Mm.
character is meant to be introduced in this way. Is like, hey, here's a main character to carry the torch from now on. Forget that Mundi stuff, or it's fine, but like this is really we found our footing.
The concept of him being someone who has lost his memories, and that kind of amnesiac effect of, well, how do we describe my sense of right and wrong? It has to come from a place of instinct, right? So on that level, that's just going to apply to any character. But given, as we spoke to a few minutes ago, the fact that this is someone who is driven very much by his internal sense of right, his instinctual kind of emotional perspective on morality within the world, which is kind of atypical for a Jedi. It's usually much more intellectual and spiritual than that. It's the perfect choice for this character to have him be someone who's kind of fumbling through refinding himself in these issues.
I also like too, like this is where we're introduced. I love the fact that like when Quinlan describes his brushes with the dark side, even though he's not fully cognizant of what it is, he describes it as him feeling like his soul is like unclean. He uses that
Mm.
descriptor several times in this story. I really like that because it shows that even if you can't put words to like this specific feeling, the nature of the dark side and him just being a force sensitive, there's an innate sort of feeling and that innate sort of corruption that no matter what, you just cannot ignore.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen of the internet, and welcome back to Fanalysis Star Wars. I'm Callum, this is Matt,
Hey everybody, welcome.
and this is Evan.
Greetings.
Today we are returning to a long set aside reading of the Republic Run comics from, I think it started in 1999. I'm correct there?
Oh,
Um,
earlier than that, like
Yeah,
maybe
I thought
before
it
Phantom
98.
was
Menace came out, yeah,
okay.
probably around 90,
Yeah,
98, 90, early 99.
Yeah,
yeah.
around that era anyway, late 90s regardless. Something that you two have got a lot of nostalgia for because you obviously were reading these pretty much as they were coming out. I was a bit later on, probably about 5 or 6 years after you guys for most of these, and I haven't even read all of them to begin with. So yeah, it's I was very excited to get back to this section of the Star Wars mythos and dive back into some of the best content that came out at that time,
Hmm.
or since, frankly. But today we're going to be, as you've seen from the thumbnail, talking about specifically Twilight. It's starting with issue 19, I think. Is it 19 to 23 for Quinlan Voss's run?
That sounds right, but
Yeah,
don't
I
quote me
believe
on
so.
that. So
Hey,
it's actually a
if I
good.
know and you guys don't,
Yeah,
something's
yeah.
gone wrong.
No, this is a good segue into this. Can I just start this off with a bunch of apologies and confessions because I kept calling this arc when we were planning our discussions. I kept calling this by the wrong thing. I was calling it Quinlan Voss Jedi in Darkness because that's the name of that omnibus.
Hmm.
So to me, it's all just one big story, and I have no idea which title goes to which. And even when I thought, okay, I corrected myself. I said, no, it's Twilight. It's Twilight. And even then, in my head, wrong arc. I was thinking we're getting into the Wolfgang Carco stuff. So
Yeah,
I'm actually not as excited today as I thought I was going to
and
be because this is really just the opening salvo. It's
Hmm.
almost these are like opening remarks. Like when you go to trial for something, we're barely into his case, you know.
Yeah.
So I thought we were going to get through a lot more of the story today than we're
Mhm.
actually going to.
This
But we'll fix that. We will fix that because we're going to cover the whole thing. So
yeah,
Hmm.
this
anyway,
this is very, very much the beginning of the story of Quinlan Voss, unless you count his very brief cameo on Nar Shaddaa with Mace Windu and Deepa Balaba in what was that one called?
yeah,
Oh,
that was
dang.
part of
Horrible with
that
names.
was part of
Okay,
Emissaries to Malastare,
That
all that
was,
thank
yeah.
stuff,
you.
but
Yes.
which itself was like a bonkers. Okay, can we just say so? Like in Star Trek language, right? Like when you're watching like the Next Generation, and if you've never seen it before, the first couple seasons of that are like a really
A little
bumpy
rough.
ride.
the
Yeah,
pre
really like
Riker beard era.
They very
exactly.
much
Okay, so that's the
do this
analogy,
later on,
right?
yeah.
That's the exact analogy. They say start watching the show once Riker has a beard. I would generally say you could start reading Star Wars Republic once it becomes about Quinlan Voss. Having said that, I really enjoy Outlander. Like that's the story about Sharad Het. It's
As we covered,
nominally a
yeah.
Mundi
Mhm.
story,
Oh, yeah, that's a great
but
one.
of the early arcs, that's the only one that I really consider like essential reading. The rest of it is a real scattershot, and we've talked about all that stuff years ago before the aforementioned unplanned break. And also just that was mostly just because of like life, and it was also like a point where just we had less interest in Star Wars. That was like
Yeah,
before we got
we
our
did
mojo
take a
back
bit of
for
a
the
blow
mythos.
post the sequels coming out
Yeah.
to our enjoyment of
Yeah.
Star Wars. Yeah,
Gee, I
had
wonder
to
what the
rally
reason
for
behind
about a
that
decade.
was. Oh, yeah. What they were
But we're
releasing
back.
that really made.
As of our
Yeah,
Dark Rendezvous
exactly.
recovery period, 2024 now,
Mhm.
just end of the start of last year. We have rallied. So yeah, back to the comics, and
Mhm.
very excited to be there. I was talking just before the recording with Evan. This is something that I've got a less of an attachment to you guys beyond just the fact that I hadn't read them as early in life, and just general knowledge of it. Because when it comes to the medium of comics, I've never had quite the same connection as some people. Particularly, I probably would say across the pond, because we don't have the same kind of comic book store tradition over here, and as a result, people who are outside of like I mean, certainly the cities and large scale towns, we don't, village kids don't tend to have the same kind of just, oh, let's go into a store and get a comic book, access. It's not part of our culture the same way here. And on top of that, I've never been a massive fan of the short form, as in the fact that you get like 8 pages per issue kind of thing, and you'd have to wait a week to get to the next part of the story if it even continued on the story, because
Mhm.
usually it would be self-contained and and not, it wouldn't be a continuing serial, Um, I kind of got a little bit more of that. I kind of get reminded of that about me when I read the Star Wars comics for these reviews, because I really enjoy the story, and I like the fact this is a four part, right? You skip some of the length issues with that. But we mentioned, Evan, you how between issues you kind of reminded about things from the previous issue, as they have to
Mhm.
re-up you. Go, oh yeah, in case you didn't see the previous, this is where we are, etc.
Yeah.
Little beats like that, the way the narration works, things like just the framing that comes across with this medium, particularly in this era before it kind of stepped away from the 80s 90s style into the more modern style. It's just there's some certain quirks that I always get reminded by when we touch on these. And yeah, I was
Can
wondering what you thought about
well, what I would say is just put cards on the table.
that.
A lot of these stories, and Callan kind of spoke to this, but to make it perfectly plain, a lot of these he has never read before. So this is his first time going through. So I will say, I can't be sure, and I'm not going to speak for you, but I would be surprised if that feeling doesn't go away, because this is like the first sprouting of Riker's beard. This is just
Mm,
when it starts to figure out what it is. The effect you're talking about goes away the deeper you get into the story, because this feels a little dated in comparison to what I think of as like the heyday of Quinlan Voss. This is
mm.
not the zenith. This is really just like his first. This is almost like his
First outing.
what do you call it? Yeah, what do you
Trial
call
run.
it? What's the
Yeah.
no? What's the word for like a new show?
It's
The first
Pilot.
episode.
pilot,
Pilot.
yeah.
This is like his pilot. Yeah.
Very much
This
so,
is
yeah.
it, this is barely like a story. This one, like, to be honest with you, the whole thing,
Yeah.
because I didn't read it the way that you're describing, like with single issues. I
Mm.
was a trade paperback person, so these did not feel like truncated shorts to me, like back in the day.
That is how I
I
tend to
actually,
read comics as well, because obviously I'm not getting them week by
yeah,
week. I collect them at the end when you've got that continuing story, and you choose a character, or you choose a team, or you choose
Mhm.
whatever it is, and that longer form can be appreciated that way. That's always been my kind of connection to comics. So that's,
yeah,
and including Star Wars. All the stuff that I have read has been from different scattershot collections that way,
yeah.
and including some Quinlan
Mhm.
Voss stuff. But funnily enough, not this one when
Right.
I initially read it back in the day. So yeah, I'm very scattershot on what my awareness is of this era of comics. So I'm looking
Mhm.
forward to filling in those gaps, particularly with, like you
Yeah.
say, the
Yeah.
Republic era stuff, which is some of the peak Star Wars material.
Mhm. And when it comes to, like, the recaps in and of themselves, it doesn't necessarily, like, take me out of, like, the narrative. It's just that, they have, like, they'll use, like, these text boxes or just kind of dialogue that sometimes feels a little bit ham-fisted in the way that it's delivered. It just comes off less smooth than it would later become, like you were saying, Matt. So that's kind of one
Yeah.
of the very few aspects, I would say, of this story that does show its age a little bit, but it by no means breaks the overall narrative
I,
because,
I'm
I
gonna
this.
wanted to
say
ask a question, sorry, just because I brought that up for the reason of
Mhm.
asking this. Is that something that was, because my understanding, again, not massive experience of comics broadly, that was like an era thing, right? It was early 2000s, they were starting to kind of veer away from that more classical approach to the medium,
I
and they were,
believe this
Mhm.
story, I believe, came out in 1998. So it's
Yeah.
still like that of that kind
Yeah.
of
That's what I
earlier
mean, and because
generation
you
of
said
stuff.
like, and
Yeah.
I know that you mentioned this before as well. I'm aware of it myself from having read some of those later stories. The style does shift rapidly towards the thing that I'm
Very.
more
Like
used to
it's
appreciating.
Mhm.
not like this.
Is
Yeah.
is that
Yeah.
is that more of this story thing, more than Star Wars, or is that just the general approach to comics in the 2000s as opposed to the 90s and previous? Because I
Well,
don't know too much about it
I'm
maybe
sure
broadly.
there's some variants, but, like, the '90s and early 2000s were a major transitional period for the medium, just just as a whole. Like, and there's like you could look up like entire articles about this and interviews. Like it was very much a shift in not only the public perception of comics, but also just how they were written, just period.
Hmm.
So I would say
Yeah.
it's a combination, and definitely not just limited. And to be fair, I'm sure there are exceptions on both sides of the spectrum. I'm sure there was stuff that came out before this that like didn't have that as much, and stuff that comes after that
Hmm.
did. But overall, yeah, it was very much a transitional period for the medium beyond Star Wars.
Cool. So I just
And
wanted to clarify that because I haven't got much experience with it, and I did notice the shift in some of the earlier and later comics that we have
mhm.
touched on before for the Star
Yeah,
Wars world.
like
So.
let's kind of stick on this point for a minute and let's just go over how we all found this because that'll kind of clarify some
Hmm.
of this a little bit. We might arrive at a little bit better understanding
Mhm.
just of what might have happened and just like our own individual experiences. Evan, you've been really excited about sharing this particular story for a while. Why don't you go first?
I mean, it's not like a super like in-depth story. I was in middle school. I was at Barnes and Noble one day, and I found it in the comics section, and I picked it up, and it was really during a time where I was really just diving into the EU as a whole, and I got drawn into it, and you know, seeing the origin of this, Quinlan Voss character, and just kind of seeing, I think this story is very, very effective at instantly hooking you because it is essentially a mystery story, like from the get go. And that sort of compelling, it was very unlike anything I had seen at the time, not even just outside of Star Wars, just in general from comics. So, because of that, it definitely has a major place where I was compelled each time. So, because of that, I really think one of the reasons I think the Quinlan Voss character with me still resonates to this day, so strongly is because he sort of, again, I don't consider this the best Quinlan Voss story by any stretch, but what I will say about this that I really do, have a lot of nostalgia for is that it showed me a Star Wars story from a different angle from what I was used to at the time. So because of that, it really does resonate, if that makes sense.
Oh,
I
sure.
mean,
Yeah.
so much so because it's like literally the first few pages of this where he's like, coming to himself and the building's burning around him and he doesn't even know who he is. Funnily enough, like when I first saw the movie like Memento, like years and years after I first read this, when I was watching that movie, like the thing that clicked into my head is like, oh, this kind of reminds me of Twilight, but much, much, much more mature. Anyone who's watching this who's seen the movie Memento knows probably what I'm getting at. But the fact that I even made that correlation when I was older just kind of, I don't know. I guess you could say it speaks to how much nostalgia I have for this, even though it is very much a pilot groundwork story.
It's the
Yeah.
benefit of coming to it very young, isn't it? It's like every story of
Yeah.
that type is someone's first, So it's you
Yeah.
make the connection to
Mhm.
Memento, and other people would have done it in reverse. I'm sure.
Have either of you guys seen that movie, by the way?
Yeah.
I've
It's
not known.
Christopher Nolan, right? One of his earlier
Yeah,
movies.
I believe
Yeah.
so. Yeah, very good. Pretty
So
intense, but very good.
yeah. So I'll go next, but first, so Evan, was this story then your introduction to Quinlan Voss, like this particular chain of issues?
Give me a minute. That's hard to answer because
Yeah.
I read a lot of Quinlan Voss stuff in like very quick
Yeah.
succession.
Yeah.
Surely our
So
introduction was all from watching Phantom Menace, right? No.
Yeah. Right. Um. Uh.
yeah, because
If
I
you don't know
got
what we're
because
talking about, just Google. But
yeah,
anyway. For
it
me,
might
it
have.
most assuredly was not. Yeah.
Yeah, it might have actually been Darkness, might have been my
Yeah.
first with him, but
Okay. So
don't
that's
it's hard to remember.
Yeah, so that's close. So you were definitely reading it more in order than I was. So for me, that's not what happened. Like, and the reason why I was like immune to the effect that Callan described earlier of like kind of having a stop starty kind of like very short sort of story experience with like single issues and everything. That wasn't a part of my experience of the character. Quinlan Voss is one of my favorite characters, and he's also I think one of the selling points of like the EU, especially from that era.
Mhm,
But looking back on it, it's less him in particular and more just like the quality of the stories that he features in, some of which
Mm.
are he's the main character of, certainly, but other ones he's just like part of like a really well realized, richly kind of honed sort of mythos that they were They were
Mhm.
firing on all cylinders at the time, like during that era, just everything they made. But I found him in trade paperback form, and it was kind of like, let's see. So in the past, I've sort of talked about how I had been through some of the earlier issues. Obviously, like I've said, the Outlander, the one featuring Shard Het, that's always been like one of my favorite stories.
Mm.
I didn't come to that with the understanding that that was part of like an ongoing series, though, and that it remained that way.
Mhm.
Every time I read a comic, like at the time that was Star Wars related, because very much early on, everything was kind of built around the Phantom Menace, so which came out in 1999. Uh, the Power Battles game that you guys have been playing, for example, that was big in my life when I was a little kid. I was born in '91 and like late in the year, so like Phantom Menace came out when I was like seven, like seven and a half, something like that.
Mm.
I was a little kid, you know what I mean? And I loved just everything about it, about like the what the EU constituted at that time. But and I thought I
Mhm.
knew it all, but I had a very, very fragmented understanding of what was going on. It didn't really cohere in my mind until looking at it in retrospect way later. So at the time, do you have in the UK, or did you have book orders at school? Like your teacher passed out books you could
Yes.
order?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
so
I was
I
wrong.
was big into the Jedi Apprentice series, which you could order from that, as well as things like Animorphs, which are not Star Wars, but just I think you could even buy Harry Potter in that way at the time.
Mm.
Hmm.
But there was no shortage of
Pretty much
titles,
everything is
just
plastic, yeah.
yeah, yeah, exactly, and everything with the Scholastic banner on it. But anyway, so I did not read. I didn't tend. I just kind of read what I could find. Like Jedi Apprentice. I read like book 2 first, and then like book 7 next, and then realized, oh, I should start from the beginning, something like that. It was a similar kind of thing with Quinlan Voss, but it wasn't intentional because when I was reading stuff early on, it was just as I found it. Then my parents like separated, so like big upset in my life. I also wasn't like buying things because part of the reason for like separation is like financial troubles and everything else. Just rocky marriage, everything else. Moved way far away, started new life, new school, something else. I never left the state, but California's a big state, so you know what
Mm.
I mean. You can move
It's a
really
very
far away and
long
still be
state.
California.
Yeah,
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 very
yeah.
long state. So I ended up taking like a break from like the EU, not by intention. It's just kind of what happened, and that's also why I love things like Darth Maul Shadowhunter, because it was a book I already had, so I just read it over and over again during like summer vacation and things like that.
Mm.
When it came to like, so this was all like around the Phantom Menace era. Then when it came time for like Attack of the Clones, that kind of came and went as just like a theater going experience for me. That was like the tail end of my parents' um they weren't happy, but they had yet to like separate. We were all still under the same roof at that time. So I remember like the ads and everything, like all the TV spots and commercials for that still being like in the same house where my parents both lived. Then the change happens, and then it becomes like a while goes by, and I'm just not. I'm largely unaware of the Clone Wars multimedia project outside of like the micro series, which was going
Mm.
on when my parents were still together. And I knew certain video games existed. I kind of knew things just by osmosis. You know what I mean? The internet was kind of like a janky version of
Burgeoning.
what it yeah, yeah. It was like
The RuneScape
recognizable as like the
eras.
internet, but
Mm.
it was still quite limited, at the time. And where we ended up moving was like I've described as like Endor before, just like full of trees and everything else, like in the middle of the woods. We had dial up, so it was like really bad internet at that point. That was after the move. I had moved from the city to there. So the reason why I bring all that up is because my parents were divorced and they were living far apart. When my sister and I would be like having to visit one or the other, if one of them would have done the whole drive, it would have meant like a 6 hour round trip thing. So we didn't do it that way. What we ended up doing was we'd meet in the middle at this mall. The mall's still there. The bookstore is not. It was a Borders bookstore. And my dad is a horrendous procrastinator. He's always late. He'll be there at 4. He'll be there at 5. He says he'll be there at 4. He'll be there at 5. Kind of, you know what I mean? Just always, 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 no matter what. So there was always like time to kill waiting for him in particular. So I'd go to the bookstore, and that's when I found these. These are the trade paperbacks of what this series becomes. And the first two I bought together. They're these ones, the ones featuring Obi-Wan and Dooku on
Mm.
the cover. And at the time, again, it was like a not completely. like unaware of the EU because I had, read a few comics, but I didn't realize they were all part of this series. Um, I kind of knew what Tales of the Jedi were, but that was before my time, and I hadn't read them in like an organized way. And this was also the same. This would be the same time when I discovered KOTOR because that was a game that I bought with my own money,
Mm.
um, that I bought from the store for PC. Even though I was usually like a console person up to that point, but I bought the discs and everything. So that was like really like finding these plus KOTOR. That was like, oh, I'm in love with the EU kind of a thing. You know what I mean? So
Your gateway drug
I
of choice.
started.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
this one. This is very much like kind of a. It's only special to me because of nostalgia. I'll be honest; these are not my favorite story. They're still good, you know what I mean. But
Mm.
compared to everything else, the ones in this, they're not the high point for me. This one, this is not the original copy of this. This one is Light and Dark. This is volume 4. This one features the issue titled Jedi Dooku. That was like the name of the kind of mini series that was a
Mm.
part of all this. You'd have issues that were called Star Wars Republic number this or that, and then you'd have Jedi Mace Windu, Jedi Aayla Secura, Jedi Shakti, Jedi Dooku. There was the only one that didn't make it was a Barris Offee one that I've always been curious about, but that one was canceled. But anyway, so the Dooku issue, it says Dooku, but it's very much it's a Quinlan Voss story, as well, and it's like smack in the middle of like his most interesting time. So I kind of read my way through this, and I was like, "Who's this guy?" And I didn't realize that this was really kind of like the midpoint, or even to almost like the latter stage of his story. So there was all this stuff to catch up on. So I worked my way backward from there. And that's the reason why this story that we're talking about today is a little quaint because it's good, but it's nowhere near as good as what's soon to come. I would say that you probably, including the art and everything, the pencils are done by Jan Dracima a lot, but the coloring, um, just the layout of everything gets more and more advanced as things go on, depending on which partner she's working with. And I think the sweet spot probably begins around Rite of Passage. Like that's where
Mm.
the art and everything takes like a big leap forward. And so many of the characters that we end up seeing later either also make appearances in that trade paperback that I just showed you, or
Mhm.
the seeds for what sprouts there are laid kind of like earlier on. And I had no idea that this was just part of like a really richly
Mhm.
developed tapestry. So it was like they were just good issues, and he was like a great character immediately. Um, Going back, it's a little less good, but it's still I have appreciation for it because I know where it's going. So
Mm.
for all that you're saying, like I agree with a lot of what you're saying, Colin, but I think very soon you'll notice,
Oh no, for
this is what
sure.
they're
And again,
talking
it's
about.
by no means a
Yeah.
critique level of this particular
Yeah,
story. It's just the medium as a whole in that era. It's something and the
yeah,
fact that I never had that kind of cultural connection to it the way
yeah,
a lot of Americans, for example, do. But yeah, it's I was excited to read it anyway because even with all those flaws, and not even major flaws, but those quirks, should we say, of the time, you still get a feel of where this is going. You still get a feel of the character. You still get a
Mhm.
feel of the kind of tone they're going to be leaning slightly into with this character because this is one of the more edgy Jedi you see by this point in the story.
Yeah.
Um,
N
and I don't mean
Not
that in
Dark
the
Empire edgy, just I just want we should establish
of
that. This
course,
is
yeah. The
a very
right
different
balance of
kind of
edgy for
edgy.
me, particularly for a Jedi
Yes.
character. It's playing some new ideas as well. You obviously leaning in with the idea that
Mhm.
it's got this amnesia. It means that you can step away from some of the standard Jedi practices and standard Jedi vibe that you've established for the previous issues, previous
Mhm.
18 issues at this point, and try something new. And have that excuse of well, he doesn't know any better at this point.
Mhm.
But you still then, because of the kind of way Jedi work and the way that the character is portrayed now and later, you still understand that even without any kind of intellectual understanding of who he is and what he's supposed to be doing, he still has that instinctual kind of connection to his roots, connection to who he is
Yeah,
beneath the
there's
surface. I love how that was kind of handled, both with the physical stuff with his abilities, but also more importantly with his instinct of his when it comes to his character. All while addressing the fact that he's raw and tempered in the sense of being more exposed to the dark side. It wasn't the most refined story that way, but I like the choice to play in that space. Have someone who's inherently good struggle with his external influence and that internal temptation while at his most vulnerable state. It's cool. I enjoy it, and the fact that I'm enjoying this with all of its quirks. I'm super excited to get to the later stuff, that some of which I have actually read because Quinlan Voss I kind of dipped in and out of at random based on the Scattershot kind of
hmm
comics that I
There's a
did
lot to
read.
choose from too.
Yeah,
So with
I'm interested to see what the
you know,
order and everything is about. What the stories that you guys have
Yeah,
of your
so
favorites,
yeah,
because
well,
I couldn't tell you the
yeah,
with this
names. I
one,
just know the content.
I
yeah.
would say that the only one that I think is weaker than this one is probably Infinity's End, because that one largely has nothing to do with anything. That's the closest Quinlan gets to like kind
Stock
of a one
story.
shot.
Mm,
Yeah,
Mhm.
it's not bad, but I don't have a lot. We'll talk about it when we get to it.
mm,
But for me, I would say aside from that and this, like the best is all like yet to come. Like it's all uphill from here. This
mm,
is sort of like again, I kind of sought this out in the interest of like fleshing out a character that I already really liked because I picked him up in the middle of his overall story. Um, but really, this is like fleshing out the pre-Attack of the Clones era. It's like funny to because it's not it's post the Phantom Menace, but it's pre-Attack of the Clones. A lot of this stuff,
mm,
and so you kind of get things tied back together in the Stark Hyperspace War, which is like a Plo Koon story. But he's telling his story to Aayla because he's helping her work through her amnesia.
Mm,
mm.
So it's like the framing device is still through these characters. They kind of feel like the heart and soul everything like Quinlan Voss was part of like a pseudo Jedi family. Him,
Yeah.
his master Thom, his former apprentice Aayla, me and cranky aunt Anya Kiro and Trasa, like being like Thom's kind of break a lot of rules and traditions within the scope of Jedidom without ruining the vibe of Jedi. And so they're kind of like the EU sort of heart and soul perspective, but you still get like all your major characters filtering in
mhm,
around them. So whenever it's not explicitly about like Anakin and Obi-Wan and the overall like trajectory of the Clone Wars overall, it's kind of grounded in these characters somewhere.
Mm.
Um,
That's
so
one of my
for
favorite
me,
things about this
yeah,
era as well. That,
yeah,
that the ability to play with that looser palette before everything kind of got tied
yeah,
together in that sort of central through line story that we see later on. This comic run, from everything I've experienced of it, which is probably like a quarter, if maybe a little bit more than that
mhm,
overall, you got to see them fill in the blanks of these other characters and
mhm,
these kind of
mhm,
quirkier, more out there stories that still seem to feel to fit the vibe of the era before everything kind of got condensed more and focused on the Clone Wars period.
yeah,
I really enjoy all
yeah.
of these.
But one thing I also will say, going back to this, there is a surprising amount of subtlety with some of the artwork that kind of became lost on me as far as like my memory goes, like going back to it. Like I really like in the beginning when he's like holding up the blaster, as they're making that getaway, through Nar Shaddaa, and you see him like literally start crying as he's like, shooting these people. And later on in that same issue, he sort of thinks to himself, like, oh, was I the one who killed my apprentice? And from
Mm,
his perspective at that time, like, oh, is he crying because he is having like a flashback memory of what he did, or is he crying about the loss of life that he's taking now, or is he crying because he's sort of inadvertently going against his Jedi-dom due to the loss of his memory? I really like the fact that when you're building that mystery, there's a few different angles you could go about it, even if you obviously know the twist going into it and what ultimately comes from it. I like the fact that the comic treats it as something that you can go from multiple perspectives about, which again, like for a story like this, it's very unique at the time. And I really appreciate when the paneling does that because you don't necessarily have to do that. But I love Again, it's like that character acting element.
mm.
So even at this point, that is something that they did get right from the get go, even though other elements will later be refined better. So it is definitely worth pointing that out too, I think.
And I know you mentioned this as well, Matt. It will get much better, but the artwork even at this point is really good. The
well,
kind
it's
of
Jan Dursema.
yeah,
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah.
absolutely
But
incredible.
this is
Andrew Siemens
this is
always brings it like
Yeah,
this is
100%.
definitely the low point of it,
mm,
if you can believe it. You know
for
what I mean?
sure.
So it's like it's the issue this one here. We'll talk about it when we get to it. It'll probably take us a few months considering the other stuff we have on the docket. But like
Mm,
some of the stuff in here, some of the artwork in here, I think is like a contender for like best in show, like best
agreed.
in
In just
Star
It
comics.
Wars
looks amazing.
comics, like
Yeah.
across the board. So like the Jedi Dooku issue in particular is like immaculate artwork, like just
Mhm.
perfect. And it
Yeah,
deals with a lot of the characters that we're introduced to in this same
yeah.
story here.
Mm,
Um,
And I
but
and I will
yeah,
say this too, like the actual character designs, like pretty much everybody featured in this issue will get like a redesign later on. But even, despite that, everyone does have a very unique and distinct look to them, which is very nice. It makes it easier to follow along with everything. Even though, like, because like when I think Quinlan Voss, I don't think of the way I don't think of him like wearing the Jedi robes he's wearing in
Yeah,
this. I
Mm.
no,
think of like his kind of Clone Wars getup when he has
yeah.
like the like the black and like the yellow like shoulder pauldron and stuff. But despite that, it still looks very nice.
Mm.
Yeah.
And of course, like Aayla, of course, looks completely different from how she did in like Attack of the Clones and all that with like her robes and stuff. But at the
Well,
same
this was her
time,
introduction, right? Like
Yeah.
she was
yes,
popular here, so they put her into Attack of the Clones.
yeah,
Yeah. But yeah, it's a story that again feels like a little quaint, and I wouldn't normally complain about anything about it, but it is noticeable just like how there is yet to be like a high jump in quality that you'll see.
Mm.
mhm,
This will bleed into like the overall tapestry, like I said, via things like the Stark Hyperspace War and a couple other stories like the Deveronian version. Those kind of round out the post the Phantom Menace era. Rite of Passage, that's the story that covers well the Jedi reaching the next rung in their respective,
mhm,
like each of them grabs a new rank over the course
Mm.
of that story.
yeah,
So and that's when you start bridging into the like Attack
mhm,
of the Clones, Clone Wars era proper, and that's where things are like really,
yeah,
like I said, firing on all cylinders, and like was like the high point for Star Wars comics as a whole, I would say, kind of began. I mean, obviously, Tales of the Jedi we enjoy, but that was sort of like a decade prior almost to that
Mm.
stuff, and was
mhm,
kind of disconnected largely from everything.
And
But for what
even
I think of as like the golden age, it's that it starts with those comics coming in, but because it wasn't just the comics themselves that are better than everything, it's just like their game was
yeah,
just so good, like
that's
as
what I
an
was about to
EU,
say. Yeah,
like yeah,
even the
it-
stuff that we like earlier in this run in the Republic Comics era, the highlights of the stories that we've already covered, they're smaller stories. They're dealing with less. They've got less time to talk about things. The characters are less developed. That just all of that added to the fact that the quality will also inherently massively upscale as well makes for like that perfect era.
mhm,
mhm,
Back when they also had
yeah,
probably the most freedom as well. I know we said about how things coalescing around the Clone Wars and it kind of made that central story the focus, but just before that and then even during to an extent they had more freedom to just play with the space and say, okay, we're going to
yeah.
write
yeah.
these stories, we're not going to deal with most of the stuff that happens in the films, or we're going to fill the gaps between the films, etc. It was just a good time to be a Star Wars fan, and that translated to the
Yeah.
writers as well.
It just gave them an excuse to just be creative and just try
Mm.
try new things at different times with different characters, and because of that, so many new quirks with these different characters were introduced as a result of it. But getting into the issues themselves, like I said, we literally begin with Quinlan Voss standing in a burning building, not knowing who he is, where he is. So, needless to say, pretty intense start. Again, I really love again these first few panels are just like burned into my memory. I didn't mean that
Pun
as a pun,
intended.
by the way, because it was on. Yeah, yeah. Okay, that was. I did not mean that as a pun, by the way. But again, the immediate hook of just having somebody in this situation questioning who he is, not just where he is, but who he is. I love it. It's a great way of instantly setting up. Okay, clearly some shit went down that we don't know what's going on here, and we want Quinlan to understand what's going on just as much as he does. So I really like the fact that again, like as you're going through this journey with him, it's very succinct. You're seeing it from his perspective because, again, even if you know going back, obviously knowing where all of this goes, it's not like leading you by the hand. Like you're not just waiting for Quinlan to figure out, okay, dude, it's clearly this. Like it's set up
Mm.
in a way where the mystery unfolds naturally. And I really appreciate that. So again, he's on Nar Shaddaa. He's wondering what's going on, and obviously we we get into Callan, you were saying this off camera. You're a very notable character to this series.
Well,
Billy,
tying with that, it's to do with the pacing. I mean, it's the fact that these early panels, these early pages, they spend just enough time. Because one of the crimes of this kind of this era's medium, as well with comics, it would rush you through certain things. It gives you just
Mhm,
enough time to kind of take in the perspective of the character of Voss, which is important because this is our introduction to the character, right? We need to be rooted into his mindset as early and effectively as possible. I mean, it's giving you just enough, even with the whole internal monologue, dialogue, uh, boxes that are kind of a quirk of the era. Even with that, it's giving you enough time to see, okay, I'm thinking about this, I'm going to go out here, nope, this is an option, got to go back in despite the flames, all that stuff.
mhm,
You get that kind of physical rooting in the character's perspective, and then immediately very quickly fill in the blanks after that, because we as readers know, oh, he's a Jedi who's lost his memory. catch up, sort of thing.
Mhm.
We get the bridge jump and the jump start to that perspective by introducing Billy,
Mhm.
because he can fill in some of these blanks. And creatively as well, later on he has a reason to be introducing these or reintroducing these blanks and be here actively. He's not someone who just stumbled into the situation and went, oh look, I'll help you out. There's a lot of
Mhm.
intentional writing to make this make sense after the fact. And also,
Mhm.
fantastic character. He's just fun. Obviously, we've seen his character in other things before, but the mannerisms, the way he speaks, the motivations, the way he flip flops, he's kind of a dark edged character, but you never feel that way because it's portrayed almost purely through the lens of
Mhm.
good natured comedy. It was
Yeah.
a very good choice, a very fun choice to kind of help fill in the gaps and carry the pacing restrictions that you're faced with when you're dealing with a story like an amnesia story like this, and particularly in comic form where you can't afford to spend the time to really dive deep early
Mhm.
as you would perhaps in a film or a book.
Yeah, he really does almost feel like a complete reversal of like the tropes you'd associate with like Chewbacca almost, because it's like, instead of being like an honorable, person, he's like complete opposite. And instead of Chewbacca, who obviously never speaks, Billy just doesn't fucking shut up. So again, it's such a departure, especially if you're like at the time when you're not used to a character like this. It
Mm.
very you remember him,
Yeah, it's very effective
extremely
for a young
so.
audience in particular. Like I say, yeah, that's a
Yeah.
big factor. Adults have seen this, Stan
Oh,
doesn't, but still effective for that.
Mhm.
young, but I think also well, that's the other thing is like Quinlan's story actually is fairly adult,
Mm.
as especially as it goes on, and you don't need to get too deep into it before it starts kind of at least at the very least orienting itself to like a teenage crowd, like more
Mm.
so than like
Mhm.
children. Um, I mean, there are like, granted that some of this existed in even like the early Chiadi Mundi bits where he was like married to multiple wives, but there are allusions to uh sex, things like that. I
Mm.
mean, like it just kind of becomes there's a lot of death, obviously,
Oh
like
yeah.
that's in Star Wars, but it gets more gruesome in the comic form than what you normally find in the films. So it's more so than like a young audience. I think and it's particularly with the amnesia gimmick. He's a fish out of water for like a new reader. You don't need
Mm.
to know what Star Wars really is beyond like a very cursory understanding to get into this, which is I think a strength that this has over any of the other
Absolutely,
stories,
yeah.
and I would include
Yeah.
Outlander in that.
Yeah, very good onboarding story, this one for sure.
Yeah, like Outlander worked. It was a great story. I love it. Obviously, everyone knows I like Charlotte Hat, but it kind of relies on you having at least seen like the first film. Like you kind
Mm.
of have a vibe of what Tatooine's about going into it. It explains itself well, but it's playing to what you already know in that sense. Um, this series really stumbled out of the gate when it was trying to kind of ham-fistedly make Mundi a star for no obvious reason. I mean, no offense to Mundi, but
No,
I
for
I feel
sure.
like they
Even
just
just the
used him
No,
visual
because
yeah.
they
aesthetic
didn't
choice,
know.
it was an one to
And
go
it
for,
yeah,
I really think that they just
and it
kind
was
of didn't
dropped
know what
so
to do, and they
immediately.
just chose
Yeah.
him at
Yeah.
large, and just rolled with it for a while, and then thought, let's do something else. And then this
Yeah.
story feels like it's crafted with intention, and this
Mm.
character is meant to be introduced in this way. It's like, hey, here's a main character to carry the torch from now on. Forget that Mundi stuff, or it's fine, but like this is really we found our footing,
Mm.
Yeah.
So that's part of the reason why Billy talking as much as he does works because he's like, oh, you're a Jedi. Jedi is not who you are; it's what you are, kind of a
Yeah, is
thing.
Jedi
Like
my
that, for
species? Like,
example.
no, it's
Yeah,
not. For the readers who wouldn't know,
Yeah.
they just hear the term
yeah.
in common parlance and
Mhm.
haven't actually experienced it within a story. It helps fill that in. Yeah, it's very
And
good
he
for that
becomes
Yeah.
reason.
much more like balls out, just like comic relief.
Oh
Like
yeah.
as things go on,
Yeah.
as things go, like
Yeah.
even in the scope of this story, that's also
Mm.
true. But
Mhm.
particularly in later issues, I mean, the Deveronian version is like the best Star Wars comedy. That's like one of the high points anyway. You have to give it to that. For intentional comedy, there's obviously
Mm.
great unintentional, just
That shit.
misfires. But yeah. But this, anyway, yeah, I agree with everything. It's great visual storytelling. It's very much, making use of like the particular medium and everything that we're going for here. It It isn't a story that I found myself revisiting. I haven't looked at this particular one in years. I don't regret
Well,
doing it, but it's just,
it's very simple, isn't it? There's not too
yeah,
much beneath the surface of this one
Mhm.
because it is, like you said, pilot is a good word for it. It's playing
yeah.
with new ideas. It's, okay, is this character going to take? We're going to align it with this age group. Not just out of universe, but also within the Jedi Order. He's an associate of Obi-Wan. They're trying to kind of give him a little niche to carve out a space so that, okay, will people be excited about this and can we take it forward?
Mhm.
All of the things that come along with that, the nature of that kind of story onboarding means that it's never going to be super complex and super deep and super nuanced. But I think the details you get between the kind of simplicity help kind of broadcast and demonstrate where it's going to be going later on. Like, I obviously
Mhm.
know a fair amount of where it ends up from just osmosis and the stories about him I have read. But even if that wasn't the case, you guys telling me, oh, it's going to get really good later on, me reading this, I would fully be able to understand that. Even with you saying,
Yeah,
caveating, this isn't his best. In fact, this is the worst of the material for Voss.
almost, yeah.
It's
Yeah,
still,
yeah.
I can see where it's heading. I can see that the
Mhm.
options. I can see the kind
Mhm.
of the direction of travel for the character and the era kind of vibe that he's going to
The
be
great
filling
thing
out, the
is
niche.
Well, I
it
think
really is everything. You know what I mean? Like
Mm,
when we talk about Darth Plagueis, we talk about a lot of these stories because there's overlap with some of these characters. We went on about the Ron Harkim story. That's part of this series, and his
mm,
that story is situated smack in the middle of like when things were at their peak in
mm.
terms of
yeah.
quality. So it really is like it enters a certain era very quickly where it's just like everything they were doing flowed so well. It is why I don't particularly care for the 2008 series because I
Mm.
I wanted that to be the same level of quality. No offense if you think it is. I disagree. I'm not trying to start an argument with anybody, but almost what I wanted was them just to adapt
Animate
those
the comics,
stories
yeah.
because
Yeah.
yeah,
That would have
Why
been
because
wouldn't you?
incredible if they
It's
did.
it's a no
after a
brainer.
certain point, particularly after the Attack of the Clones, I found myself more and more like whether it was KOTOR or a comic or sometimes even other games or other novels. Um, Many of them we've already spoken about, things like Dark Rendezvous, etc. I found myself going, "This is what I want the movies to be. These are
Mm.
better than the movies."
Irrefutably.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I mean, I think Antoine never agreed with that, but or with our opinion on that. I think he was always very much kind of he would always hearken to the movies first and foremost, and everything else kind of took like a back seat.
Mm.
He still makes allusions to that, and at the same time, I know he loved all this stuff. I know he
Mm.
loved Quinlan, and things like that. But I always just there were so many times where I thought this scene here or that scene there or this character work here. That's precisely what I wanted to actually see in the prequels. And so many times I found myself telling friends or family about who didn't read these or play the games or whatever about what I thought Star Wars could easily be or should easily
Mm.
be, especially if they were like the prequels are like a snooze fest or something. Hard to argue with, but
Yeah.
here's what it easily could have been.
Well,
And
Yeah.
I would just
it's like
You
we
can see
said
the
so many
elements where they
times.
could have been improved,
Yeah,
so easily because it's so glaring.
yeah. I mean, like we said before, so too many times probably at this point. But the ideas behind the prequels are all there. The groundwork is there. The foundations, the concepts. Just pick them up, give them to competent writers, and play with them all. That's what these stories are. It's I don't mean to say that there's a massive detraction of the films, but one of the weaknesses of people even who love those films, I would say, is the depth of the kind of the narrative within the world. It's a very surface level telling in a much richer world than that's really kind of
Yeah.
plumbing and taking advantage of. And these are the stories where
Mhm.
they really did do that.
Mhm.
Tell a small short story about the grief. Tell a short story about amnesia. Tell a short story about struggling to find love in an order that doesn't permit it. Things that frankly, the films didn't have time for in a single trilogy format. It had more space to breathe there. And
Mhm.
I do love the fact they managed to take some of those concepts and ideas and really
Yeah.
give it to us. Um, but particularly given the fact that they're doing it through multiple characters as well. These characters are not film characters that take center stage in the films. That's not something to be
Mhm.
taken for granted because you don't get that in many franchises and many settings. It's
Mhm.
very cool.
Yeah. And they did try to bring these characters into the Clone Wars series, and for the most part, they
Did
did
they?
not succeed, in
Did
our
they?
I
opinion.
never, yeah,
I'm way more
let's
favorable
not
about
even
that
go
series
down
than
that
either
road.
of you. But even
I
on
said they
that
tried.
front,
I'm
I don't know,
saying
I know. But even on that front, that's like, I mean, they just annihilated Voss, for example. Secura, they
I'm
just
sorry,
did
yeah.
very
yeah.
strange
I mean,
things, but
it's
Voss is
just
not the same
Like,
person.
I don't see how anyone could look at their depiction of Voss and then look at these stories and, like, I'm sorry, like, if you like him, sure, that's whatever, but, like,
It's an
from
insult.
me, like, I can't see how you can put them by side and say, like, they are objectively as good as each other. I'm
it was
sorry.
pretty roundly panned, like by
Yeah.
everyone who knew the
Yeah.
I don't understand. I don't understand doing an adaptation and then just changing things on a fundamental level. Like, who is it for at that point? Because
Mm.
anybody, if you were like, say you were the same age I was when I was watching the prequels as they were coming out. If you were a 7-year-old in like 2008, that's great if you love that show, but you don't know who Quinlan Voss
Yeah, that
is,
could have been any
and
character doing exactly the same
yeah,
thing and no harm
yes,
done.
Yeah.
But because you
who's that
chose someone
for
who
then?
was known,
Yeah,
they're not. It's not the character. It's a different character. It just looks
they
like
should
it.
have just they
Right.
should have just made him into a different character and had him
Yeah.
do what he did. You know what I mean? And that would have
More
been fine,
Armagun
Right.
or at least
dies is
less
Well,
what
actually,
means in the
painful.
Clone
speaking
Wars.
to yeah, but actually speaking to Voss's character, there is another element to the story that I really think is worth like acknowledging that is kind of tragic, no matter how you really look at it, because him and Aayla have lost their memories and needed to rebuild from here. This is essentially the death of like who they were before this. Like we
Mm.
don't really get like we get like snippets here and there in flashbacks, but like who they were before this are effectively gone. Like after
Mhm,
this, like them having to rebuild, like we never really see in full what they were beforehand. And at the end of the day, even for everything they recover, they're still changed by these experiences
for
forever.
sure. Yeah,
Mm.
So I think and
they did it
that is also
perfectly.
yeah,
Yeah,
like that is something that no matter like they succeed at the end of a lot of this, but at the same time there is something that they never get back, and that is
yeah.
that is tragic, and it kind of sets the groundwork for them having to rebuild themselves after this into who they were. Like you can't help but wonder like, oh, if Quinlan and Aayla never lost their memories, would they be the same people they were when we see
Mm.
them in the Clone
Definitely
Wars?
not. Yeah,
Probably
for
not.
sure.
It,
Yeah,
it's
Definitely
probably
something.
not.
not.
Yeah.
It's something that's dived into in other stories. Just traditionally, memory loss. Certainly, memory loss of that scale is death. If you think
Yeah.
about okay, everything you are, every aspect of who you are as a
Yeah.
person, you lose the memories of just today. You basically die because you wake up tomorrow with as a different person. You've lost even that tiny fragment is enough to have redefined you in many ways. It's kind of
Mhm.
the mental version of that whole Star Trek teleportation question. Are you being
Mhm.
killed and reassembled somewhere else
Killed
as a
every
different
time you
person?
switch
Yeah.
Yeah,
around every time. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Is that
Yeah.
mentality, but just on the internal rather than the
Mhm.
external? You can't
Yeah.
play with these kind of things and not raise those questions. And this story does. It's like you say, what was lost
Yeah.
here? What was lost by this horrific abuse of the glitterstim
I'm
overdose?
Yeah, and
I'm really
here's the thing,
glad.
they never, like, back out of it, like,
Yeah.
they don't, like, recover
Mm,
everything in full, that
Yeah.
yes.
never happens.
Yeah.
They
Absolutely
stick to it.
essential to the story. Very good point. Yeah, I so respect them for making that choice. Granted, it's not the same as if they were already pre-existing characters and they'd lost something that we were aware of. We didn't know about them before this, so that kind of gives them
Mhm.
the leeway to make that choice. But even
Sure.
so, I really respect them for going for it because it gives you. It means
But
they don't have that easy out. The way they could have done.
yeah, the
Mhm.
cool thing, they did it really perfectly, given the starting point. Like if you take what you just pointed out, the fact that they weren't just being introduced to them anyway, anyway, so that the point is not so much that we experience a personal grief for like the
Mm.
characters that they used to be. That's a caveat. Just
Yeah, yeah,
when
for
we're
sure, for
meeting
sure.
them here, right?
Yeah.
But if we're taking it on its terms, they did it perfectly because, and I'm glad you pointed this out, Evan, because it's like I don't really think I can think of another example where this was done, where it's not just a reset, or
Mm.
it's just like not a main feature of somebody's story, like in an ongoing series. You could think of like one-off episodes of this or that sci-fi show where like a character that was only part of one story might go through something like this and is forever changed by it. But it's
Mm.
usually not something that you'd see in an ongoing series like this, because they get the best of both worlds because of the fact that we do run into I mean, you talked, they're mentors. You talked about, I say mentors in the plural here
Mm.
because he mentor, but um he himself needs to submit for retraining under Windu. So like when I first met the character, it was like in the middle of his series, and there would be allusions to that. It's like, why does he know Vapad? Why would Windu
Mm.
train him? Or like when did that happen? And like he's not that much different age from like his like other Jedi. Like when did Windu when would he have been his main master? It's like no, he was sort of like a very special case, whereas like Windu's guiding him back into onto the path of what he already knew. But like, and I didn't really realize that that was part of like an actual story, like this one,
Mm.
because it was just something that they would talk about. I didn't realize, oh, you actually get to see that if you backtrack enough.
Windu's something I
Um,
want to talk about at the tail end of this as well, because this is one of those
well, yeah,
rare
we'll get more
stories
into that
this
later.
era where
Yeah,
he's
yeah, yeah.
actually done really
But
well for that reason.
well,
Windu usually gets a
it's
short
kind
shrift
of
in things like this.
No, this series
No,
plus
that's what I
like
mean.
this
I'm
run, like
looking
yeah,
forward to that. This being
Yeah,
the
yeah.
exception
yeah.
to that rule, because up to this point, even
Oh
in
yeah.
the comics,
Well,
he's kind of like a bit
this one
Windu.
here, wait till we get to this one, volume
Mm,
one. I mean, that's like
Oh,
every,
that's gonna be
so
fun, yeah.
anyway,
very excited.
but that like again, it it's a different beast. Like like
Mm,
that was that for me real Star Wars. You know what I mean? But anyway, um, I say mentors in the plural because Thom obviously is like a major
Mhm.
part of this, and Thom is not somebody who goes through amnesia, so he can remember objectively what happened, like going back to like when these kids, because what it ends up being is Ayla eventually she completes her training under Thom because
mm.
Quinlan is busy relearning from Windu. So
Excellent story
Thom
choice as
remembers who
well.
they used to be. You know what I mean? And so and Thom's a character. Thom effectively is POV. There are times where we're just following Thom. You know what I mean? So when he remembers the past, we see objectively how they used to be, but
Mm,
it's just enough to get a picture of what that was all about without
Mhm.
wrecking the effect you've already described of this event still changed them forever. She's also of a species that has a unique relationship with deep memory stored into the
the
Twi'lek
Leku,
signature
yeah.
organs, the Leku.
Like, yeah.
So she can have a bit of it. I would say between the two of them, she's more put back together
Mm,
than Voss is by the end of everything. She's still missing things. But you know, even things like the fact that I mean, he wouldn't have learned Vopad, for example, if he hadn't needed to be retrained. You know, so it is
Yeah,
an event that changed them in superficial ways, but also in very deep ways. The
yeah,
phrase "you can't go back home again" or "you can't go home
yeah.
again"
It,
comes
it
to mind.
it
You
really
know,
captures that bittersweet quality and like, oh,
yeah,
what all
yeah.
the things we've lost. You know, how do we deal with the fact
Mhm.
that we have lost them and can, and more importantly, not just lost them, can never get them back. That's
Yeah,
there's a distinction between those two perspectives there,
and
and I really like that it
and when you
plays with
do
that, even in this story.
yeah, yeah, and when you do throw Thom in there, like you were saying, Matt, like, the fact that he can see so distinctly the 2, sides of their life from his perspective, because we even like, he was around when Quinlan discovered Aayla, so
yeah,
he's
Mm,
literally been there from, like, basically day 1, and
yeah.
obviously he was one who, discovered Voss as well, so he's seen
Because
pretty much their entirety of their lives from the
mm,
get-go,
yeah,
so it's like like, like, basically, like, imagine you're, like, a parent or a grandparent, and, like, your kid and your grandkid, like, can't remember you for a bit, but you can remember them from the start, even if they do eventually recover a lot of that. So, I mean, that's another element of tragedy, from his
yeah.
perspective as well.
mm,
Quinlan
You
and
know?
Ayla have a very without spoiling. Well, it's not really a spoiler. If you're watching these, just know we talk about things in depth. I won't give the details of these stories away, but we see in Rite of Passage, we see how they meet, and it's an unusual circumstance because usually, you know, you think of a Jedi Master being like either a full-fledged master or a knight or something. You're like an
mm,
adult happening upon, you know, their new young ward, the young charge, the new student. It's Merlin and Arthur, kind of a thing,
yeah,
right? In that case, Quinlan was still very much like a kid, like barely into like his Padawan training when he stumbled over like toddler Ayla. So she grew up in the temple while he had time to complete his training, and he immediately like snapped her up. So
such
it's
a perfect
they kind of grew up
choice.
together, but it's a
Oh
very
yeah,
very different story than what you normally get for like you know Jedi. Um,
yeah, and we and we'll get like
it's almost like this, like if you were responsible for raising your sibling, like if your parents
Yeah,
died or something,
exactly.
it's
It's
kind
touching
of
on a
that
lot of
kind of a
those
thing.
relatable emotional
that's a very
touchstones that
good
people had from that era in
comparison.
particular as well. Like I said before, the creative space they have to work with at this time, while in that era of pure love. You know, the Star Wars before it had kind of gotten a bit more commercialized. It comes a bit later on,
Mhm,
even before the sequels or the Disney era stuff. It kind of got to a more, how do we make this into a product that
mhm,
we can sell? It had obviously always been that, but this was still when things were loose enough that you could just take a writer, throw them at the Star Wars setting, and they would do something with it. You know,
mhm,
coalesced enough where they
yeah,
had
and
that shared trajectory, but not so much they were stifled, and you get
yeah.
things like this as a result.
Yeah, and as we go through, like, Nar Shaddaa, I also like, this is our introduction to Quinlan's psychometry abilities,
Mhm.
which, again, I really love the fact that they using it as a framing device to help him recover his memories, but again, like, I love the fact that they don't just use that as an automatic
Mm,
get out of jail
Mhm.
free card for him
exactly.
in entirety. Like, obviously, it helps him, like, put some major pieces together, but again, like, I feel like if this was in the hands of maybe some other writers, they would have used that ability of his to completely, like, reboot his memories
Mm,
entirely, but
Mhm.
I love the fact that, like, even though it is explicitly pointed out in this story that his psychometry abilities are advanced by the standards of his species, obviously there's going to be certain limitations to that no matter what he does. And again, I love that they stick to that, but at the
Mm.
same time they use it as basically what I like is it helps move the plot forward, like him going to the Kefar home planet and all that, and him when they're later on Ryloth and him discovering like, wait, we weren't actually in this room, like
Yeah,
I
that's
their
great. Yeah.
impressions and stuff.
Mm.
Again, it's you can say that it's a plot device, but plot devices in and of themselves are not bad as long as they're used effectively, and I think this is an
Yeah.
example of
Yeah.
using an inherent advanced ability that only well, not only he has, but, like, specifically inherent to him without making it the central reasoning for why he uncovers this conspiracy. He still has to put the pieces together in a natural way, which for any mystery story, I think is essential.
We've talked about in other stories the concept of kind of a writer's contrivance, and that is what this is. But it is not inherently a bad thing. It's a tool. It's how you use it. You know, it's you're taking
Yeah.
the flaw here in a lesser story would be, oh, I've got this ability. I just need to remember how to do this, and I'll get my memories back. And even if they're secondhand, they'll be vaguely functional memories. It doesn't take that path, like you said. It's purely used to help peel back certain stages of the mystery as you progress. And the thing that made it even better than that for me was, like you said, with the room in particular, painting with the negative space. I don't remember anything about this, therefore I know I wasn't here. You know, that is the beautiful kind of capstone to that concept within the story, and they take that, I know, forward to the following parts of his series. So yeah, fantastic choice of tool for them writing this mystery.
I would like to, if I might, if I could just cut in for a second and just be a little pedantic, rather than call it a contrivance, I might say it's a conceit from the author.
Yeah, well, that's I guess the difference between the two, isn't it? It's when it's a tool, it's conceit. When it's kind of a failure, it's a contrivance, I guess you'd say. It's when you're, as a reader or a viewer or an audience of any kind, it's when it's kind of chafing. It's like, oh, I can feel that this is forced, you know, rather than it just coming at you naturally. And oh no, that works perfectly. A contrivance is the conceit that you've detected, I guess, is the way to put it.
Yeah, and
there's
there's this domino effect because it's like, okay, he has this ability, so that leads Villy to be like, "What species are you?" So he scans him. It's like, "Oh, you're from this planet." So
that was a little bit of a contrivance. That one. So, I know your entire family backstory from a single scan. I can just narrate it to you. Talking about the foibles of the time, that would be an example of that.
Fair enough. I would agree with you there. By the way, just before that sequence, we get one of the funniest lines in this like little story arc to me when they're escaping Nar Shaddaa, because like Villy, he put a bigger bet on him helping Quinlan escape, and he does, and he's like, oh, you know, Villy's a rich being again, and then Quinlan's like, oh, great, now you can pay back that gangster who you sold this ship to, and it's like, I'm poor again.
You know what's funny about that?
Comedic timing is so like, oh, Villy is poor being again.
The deeper we get into Quinlan's story, he would just not have even cared about that. Like he's because you know it's never that Quinlan is like an evil person or whatever, but he's very much
he's willing to bend the rules a bit more with the Jedi-dom than a lot of other.
He's a lot more nonchalant than the rest of them are. Yeah, for sure.
I'm just gonna say this, like just to put that in perspective. Quinlan Voss would be very much at home in the NJO. I'll just put it like that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Perfect.
He's kind of like a smuggler meets Jedi. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But he's his own Han Solo. You know what I mean?
I would say Han Solo with a lightsaber is another way of doing it.
Yeah, but I love that little bit of dialogue because again, the comedic timing of it is just like they don't drag it out. It's like, I'm rich, great, you can pay him back. I'm poor again, you're no fun. And then they just keep going. Like, again, it's a boom, boom, boom. It's perfect.
And the choice of the droid too, as well with Auntie is a really cool choice. Just fun little Star Wars vibes. I love it.
But the setup is great too, because when he like suspects that there's a bet going on, he says, "You didn't happen to place a little bet?" I was like, "No, big bet." You know, so it's like
I love the dialogue. I love Villy's dialogue.
John Ostrander, man, he's like John Ostrander things are like when you look at his credits, it's almost like, wait, did you do everything? He's like, no, he didn't, because you know, he's Hayden Blackman and many other people like did a lot of great stuff. But
he is a master at character voice. Like, and again, that's not the
real
easiest
key
thing to do with comics.
Yeah,
it's not a novel, but
comics.
He puts so much personality in these little bubbles, and it does not feel contrived. It's so nice.
Can I say it's like he slips into the skin of the character because he effectively, like whenever Mace shows up, it's effectively prequels Mace, but better. You know what I mean? So we could get more into it later, but it's just like a character who's cardboard wooden, just nothing there.
Has some presence to him. Yeah, exactly.
Has the same voice, but is doing stuff in a satisfying way. It's like it's akin to acting. It's like it's almost like he's a great stage writer or something.
And I also want to say there was very clearly solid communication between the two parts of the teams with the writing and the artwork, because just there's a pacing quality even within from panel to panel with how, like, that joke you made, Evan, the perfect example when he's like, if it is a rich pig, if it is a poor bit, you can see it playing out as though it was animated in terms of how the dialogue flows, the placement of the speech bubbles, the kind of cutaway without it being a real cutaway on the page to his next expression. It's so perfectly handled, even at this early stage
like
where it isn't the prime.
It really does. Like, it feels like if you were to like make this into a TV show, you really wouldn't have to add a ton of things in the grand scheme of things to make that flow feel natural.
Exactly, and that's where comics thrive. You use the word character voice, perfect example. That's where the comics lend themselves as a medium to me. That's where they kind of the perfect blend between book and animated series. You know, that's where it lives. But and so often, particularly in this era and previous to this, it was always like, and so our heroes traveled to the next planet where they found this thing, and it was that. You know, that's the stuff that really saps that from it. To see even within the spaces of these 4 series issues, to see that kind of transition into what will come later on, and what will be better developed and more kind of exploiting that creative space. I'm really excited for it because it's strong, super strong.
Yeah, and I also love that like they make each setting feel incredibly unique. Time spent at each is relatively small because it is kind of is a shorter series. I do appreciate that. And again, sticking with speech patterns first, like you mentioned, on T when they go to, Kifar. Is it Kifu or Kifar?
I think he's from Kifu, right?
Kifu, yeah.
Wait.
Is it Kifu and Kifex?
The Kifar. Okay.
Yeah, sorry, the
Kifex
Kifar
is the sister world.
Yeah.
Kifar's the species. Kifu's the world that we're the main world that we're on. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, sorry. When they go to Kifu and he's like talking to Auntie, she also has a very specific way of speaking. And also, can I just say, like seeing her in her introduction, how relatively tame she is as a character compared to her later appearances, when she just goes full evil, is kind of.
She's had a few years to deteriorate by that point, right?
Somewhat comedic to me. Like, I know it's not intentionally comedic, but the fact that like you look at her here and she's just so much extra, like later on, is kind of interesting to me. Like they really just took what was introduced, like little bits that were introduced with her here, and just ran with it. I
also find it really funny that her insignia is just a star. It's just a star, like a sheriff's badge kind of thing for the Guardians. It's just amusing to me, or his clan at least.
Yeah.
It is kind of funny because when I first like met her, I was like, who does this person think she is? I was like, oh, she was introduced somewhere else, but because like she's, like in the Dooku arc, she's biting off a lot more than she can chew.
Put it mildly.
Just a bit.
But I kind of get her though, because this is very tame for her.
Like even in Darkness, like we see what like she was the one who fucking traumatized Quinlan with his fear of Anzadi and all that. Like she was kind of the impetus for that. So it's like, but like even here, she's like, again, she's kind of relatively tame. She's even like, well, you could join the Guardians if you want. There's always a place for you here. You're my nephew and stuff. It's
but
like,
no,
that's
the Jedi
nice.
give nothing back. Ugh. But then still helping him, giving him the information he needs, communicating with the Order, all that stuff.
Compared to where she later goes, like this is like tame compared to like.
Sure, I've seen some of where she goes. That's some of the series that I have actually touched back in the day. So it's a harsh transition.
Yeah, I also like too, like this is where we're introduced. I love the fact that like when Quinlan describes his brushes with the dark side, even though he's not fully cognizant of what it is, he describes it as him feeling like his soul is like unclean. He uses that descriptor several times in this story. I really like that because it shows that even if you can't put words to like this specific feeling, the nature of the dark side and him just being a force sensitive, there's an innate sort of feeling and that innate sort of corruption that no matter what, you just cannot ignore. And I really like that. I just want to say like really good on them for the descriptors for that dialogue.
It lends itself to the larger story as well, because and I don't know how much of it, I mean, I'm pretty sure it would have been intentional, but the concept of him being someone who has lost his memories, and that kind of amnesiac effect of, well, how do we describe my sense of right and wrong? It has to come from a place of instinct, right? So on that level, that's just going to apply to any character. But given, as we spoke to a few minutes ago, the fact that this is someone who is driven very much by his internal sense of right, his instinctual kind of emotional perspective on morality within the world, which is kind of atypical for a Jedi. It's usually much more intellectual and spiritual than that. It's the perfect choice for this character to have him be someone who's kind of fumbling through refinding himself in these issues. He will the Jedi he will go on to be for us in the rest of the series, whether it's as a result of this experience alone or something that he had inherently anyway, it perfectly fits like a glove. This kind of starting point we've had for him as an origin for the character.
Mhm.
He has to be instinctual
I
and emotional
Yeah.
and emotive because that's who he is to us now. It's a really
yeah.
strong creative choice for consistency's
Yeah,
I
sake.
and
don't
it's
actually.
yeah. Well, I know it sounds obvious to point out too. I just think, but like you have to also consider his age in that too,
Mm.
because he is like, how old is Quinlan supposed to be here?
He's the
Like,
same,
Same age
more
as
or less.
Obi-Wan,
He's the
so
same age as Obi-Wan.
yeah, so
Because when we
roughly.
see
So
flashbacks, they're like the same age Padawans together playing
that's
around
what
in
I
the
was
water.
thinking.
Yeah.
Thinking, yeah. So like early 20s ish,
mm.
I suppose, at this
At this
point,
Probably
because
mid
stage,
20s by this point, right?
he
this
might
is
be
like,
25. Like
yeah.
Obi-Wan, I think is supposed to be 25 in the Phantom Menace, more or
Okay,
less. You know.
that tracks. So he is, but like what I'm kind of getting to that is like he is someone who has had maybe like obviously not as much of experience of like compared to someone like Windu, of course, but at the same
Mm.
time, experiences in his previous life to where no matter what you do, certain things will just never fade away. And again, that
Mm.
also helps him in this rebuilding process and also kind of explains why he's able to do some of the things he is able to do so instinctually,
Mm.
despite having forgotten so much of his training. Because again, there are some things that you just can't fully erase. And I think
Well, they
his age is something to consider for that as
yeah.
well,
Yeah,
which I
They,
like.
they liken it to muscle memory, which
which
is
is the
relatable
perfect
whether
example.
even in the absence of the Jedi, supernatural stuff.
Mm.
But I'm not sure. I was going to say I don't actually know what they were thinking when they came up with this story, but I don't know what the thinking was behind making him um, amnesiac, other than what we kind of already spoke to. It's a great fish out of water, rediscovering who I am as a Jedi, but also like introducing the reader to what like a Jedi is supposed to be, and having kind of that explained to a character who should, in theory, already know it. But
Mhm,
I think some of it is shorthand for not going into what's my past and
Mm.
what was I doing during the films. I think some of that is part of just that because it doesn't matter
Yeah.
effectively. You know what I
mhm,
mean? We kind of got. I'm sorry to say it this way. I feel like we got saddled with Kiadi Mundi because he was like a character who was up for grabs, who was in the movies. We wanted a tie-in. We wanted
Mm.
somebody but who was recognizable because he'd been on screen. This character, although as you
mhm.
alluded to, kind of technically sort of on screen, sort of if you squint.
Retroactive,
If
yeah.
you squint,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um, uh, this character is effectively like brand new creation. How do we do it? Usually you need some kind of a gimmick, whether that's a costume or just some kind of story conceit, whatever. He's amnesiac, he has a signature ability. None of them feel like they're the point of the character. If there
Mm.
is a point of the character, it I think becomes this his issue with dancing around morality, trying to
Mhm,
find his way in the dark. That's
Mm.
effectively what the character is about. I don't think that they necessarily set out for that from the beginning because that just seems too perfect and too genius to me. I think they
Mm.
kind of realized this works really well with this character, and in the context of the Clone Wars and what the likes of Sidious and Dooku were doing with
Mm.
having kind of their own personal goon squads. The idea of having a Jedi join Dooku's inner ranks and thinking, or at least trying to be like a double agent, and sometimes being successful and sometimes falling prey to the illusion. Um, it's I think that I think it's just an organic story. Like it's just something
Mm.
that came together over the course of a lot of years and a lot of effort and trial and error, and realizing here's the sweet spot. This is what the
Yeah.
character's about.
yeah.
I
And
think that's what happened. You know.
and adding to that too, like, I like the fact that this story really plainly illustrates how scary a Jedi with no morals
Mm.
can, like, really be because, the things and I'm not just talking from a power sense, although, that's obviously a factor, but, like, in scenes, like, where he's, like, interrogating like Bib Fortuna, for example, and like he's like thrashing him around with telekinesis and stuff, and Bib's like, "You're a Jedi, like you can't do this, like you have a code." It's like, I don't remember the code. Like, you think that
Mm.
means anything to me? That's what Voss is telling him, and that's scary, genuinely, because he literally can't remember the ideals that are supposed to hold him back. So you're essentially just taking away the one thing that would keep Jedi from basically doing whatever the hell they wanted in the grand scheme of things. And that is scary. And
Yeah.
I think the story does a really good job of illustrating that. And of course that gets pushed to the upteenth when we, get the interrogation scene with Paul Secura later on, which we'll get to. But again, the fact that they lay the groundwork for that so early is really nice, and and again, it really does speak to. just how much Jedi hold back in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah,
It's another
I
piece
would
of the
also
story that
say
feels very timely as well, in terms of like the
mhm.
responsibility of power and how one wields it.
And again,
It's a timeless story.
I think scenes like that and many others, 'cause, Aayla has a bunch of scenes like that and arcs to come as well. You sort of again, it gets closer and closer to realizing, "Oh, these characters work really well for exploring the kind of gradient, like the difference
Mm,
between like, what is the difference between a Jedi and a Sith? Like, when do you stop being one or the other?"
Mhm.
And, without the characters feeling like they're haphazard or fickle or don't know what they're
mm,
doing, it's done in a very organic way, a very compelling way. But I would say that this applies more to Cade Skywalker when you're getting into the legacy comics, but there
Mhm.
is the element of addiction,
mm.
temptation, like, like, I mean, temptation is always there. I mean, "Join me, blah, blah, blah," like, that's always been
Mhm.
there, right? You know what I mean? Or it's probably better from Vader's perspective, where it's like, "Join me, and we'll overthrow the Emperor, and, like, we'll rule together as father and son." Like, he's probably better with the temptation angle, because the
Mm.
Emperor's just sitting there with basically, like, "Your friends are getting fucked up, and if you wanna stop it," you know what I mean? It's like he's kind of enjoying it a little too much, and just
Mm.
he doesn't really have that much of like an olive branch out like to Luke, whereas Vader has something quite compelling, like something more logical, something
Yeah.
more easily attainable. So it works there. But in what you're talking about, just the ease of access to just I'm just going to exert my power now and fuck it,
Mm.
like that's a part of just the daily struggle of the temptation. It reminds me of something like, I mean, in Cade's case, addiction is used as like an outright um not just allegory. It's in the story, so it's more than just allegory, but it's also
Right.
an allegory for his relationship with the Force. You know what I mean?
Mm.
So it's more
Good
than
point.
just a metaphor, but it is used as one. But in this case, it does it. The further you go with Quinlan, the more and more it feels like you're dealing with somebody who maybe has like a drinking problem, and they
Mm.
occasionally relapse, and again, and then at some point he gets on an undercover mission where his job is to work at the bar.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just
It's the
that's
worst,
Yeah.
but also best person to put in that situation, kind of
yeah,
situation. Yeah,
Mhm.
I really like
yeah.
the choice for that.
Major risk.
It's interesting because with this theme, I mean, we talk about the kind of the canon of comic book fiction and lore. I mean, obviously, with the Spider-Man being the prime example, that great power comes great responsibility. Having
Mhm.
that present in a character like this, when they're trying to set up this origin for someone like, who's going to be carrying the kind of it's going to be their kind of first family of their run of comic books, for the Star Wars franchise. Having that twist and having that played into the already relatable on a more human level Jedi that they've set up for this. You mentioned before, Matt, how, and I agree with you, it feels like it was an organically developed story where they kind of found themselves and almost fell into the oh, this is a brilliant idea and it works perfectly for this character kind of feeling. But there is enough in these early issues to sell me on the concept that this was pre-planned, at least a good portion of it.
What I mean, can I just say the bit? What I mean to say is, we talked about this last time we talked about Plagueis, for example, but
Mm,
Dooku, for example, was not a concept in 1998. We don't think.
yes.
You know what I mean? So the idea of
Yeah, for
him,
sure. Yeah, they definitely plug
the way
some
that this
stuff in.
ends,
Yeah, yeah.
the way that this ends with like Sidious watching him, it feels like maybe he's a candidate to replace Maul.
Yeah, no,
Now,
exactly. Yeah,
if
they were
that
setting
now
they were
that
setting
becomes
enough up
Dooku,
to leaving it open.
Mhm.
yeah,
They gave themselves options.
yeah,
But what I'm saying is thematically that the idea, that no matter how the details manifested for them, I feel like they
yeah,
started with a strong point with the concept. Okay, we want to play with this particular space, and how that happens, we'll see what we're given. What
I
we've got to
agree.
work with,
I
and
yeah.
that's really effective. Especially given the fact that it does feel that organic.
You're right. I just like to highlight the fact that to me the story only gets more and more interesting the deeper you get into it, and
Mm,
also like I said, the relationships that they in particular have with like their other little Jedi pseudo family members who aren't introduced in this arc. Those just everything kind of blooms from there. You know what I mean? So
mm,
I feel like I think that they had certainly committed to this as our new main character.
yeah.
Precisely exactly what they were going to do. I think they found their path forward when they realized how the films
Yeah.
were going.
Mm,
Yeah.
But yeah, I
But
mean,
yeah.
it's a solid foundation. I don't want to detract too much from what you're saying. Like they
mm.
certainly knew they certainly had an idea of what they wanted to do with him. I just think that the best stories tend to be not happy accidents necessarily, but just there's a bit of serendipity
Yeah,
to some
you
of
grow
to
into
like the best
them.
of
Yeah.
them.
Yeah,
Which, I mean, Star
Yeah.
Wars is kind of like an epitome of that anyway, like,
The
if you
first one
exactly.
in
consider the
particular,
original
yeah,
trilogy,
it
like,
found
it
itself in
very
the
much
editing
was
as
that.
well, and it
Yeah,
was
very much was
art from
that.
adversity and all the rest of it. It was
Mhm.
a horrendous experience for many people, but
Mm.
they made one of the most classic films of all time, which you can say about most of the best films.
Yeah.
Right,
That's
right.
a thing. Yeah, yeah. But
Sometimes the
anyway,
stars just align, and sometimes it just works out, and it spirals into things that we're still talking about to this day. So
The
yeah,
Force was
fate's a funny thing.
yeah.
But you were talking about like speaking of drugs, actually, this is actually the sequence where we learn that one of the major impetuses for their original mission was the introduction of a new drug to the black market, which is actually a combination of two different substances, spice from Kessel and spider silk from Ryloth.
that
I believe.
the
It was
spiders is
real,
from
right?
Kessel,
Yeah,
and
spiders.
the
Sorry.
and the real spice.
It's spice glitter
Yeah,
stim from Kessel, and it's
Right.
Rill
And
from
but they
Ryloth.
move the spiders to Ryloth too, which is weirdly
Yes,
enough,
correct.
so
To
they would
make
use it
glitter
on.
Rill, I think they call it, because it's a combination of the two.
Yeah, sorry, it's a weird combination of
The only reason
substances.
I know that any of this at all is because I've just literally like a week ago read where Glitterstim was originally referenced, the material or the extraction of it anyway with the Academy trilogy that we've got coming up. So that's the only reason I know that.
yeah.
It was weird reading that and getting the reference like immediately come back up in this comic. Yeah, and it's a good choice of like two different references they get to make and then put it together as part of a new story. It's just the fun that they got to play with back then when they were originally writing all this stuff out of this era of Star Wars.
I thought it was a little funny because like glitter still kind of feels like a is it glitter still or glitter stem? Like what is it called?
Glitter Stim
Like
and Rill get
glitter
put together
stem,
to Glitter
and
Rill.
it
Yeah.
becomes glitter roll. Okay, so
Mm.
like I thought it was funny because like so he's talking with Tinte about all this, and she's like, oh yeah, we know what those are, and she's just got like the details. She's like, oh like glitter stem, like that comes from Kessel, like with these spider things, and
Mm.
real that comes from Ryloth, and I'm just like it's fun because I like I actually like it as like a sort of detective following clues kind of a thing. I think it's a
Mm.
good setup, and like this is like a new compound that they've thrown together, so it's a different drug on the street now. That's fun, but I like the everything feels so well thought out. Except what's the drug from Ryloth called? Real? It's like that's the thought that went into that. You know what I mean? Just
Well,
like whatever. But it works better as like real spice because it's
Mm.
like like spice
Mhm.
from Ryloth kind of a thing. But just
Yeah.
calling it real is like a little bit like if I went to New York and I'm looking for want some New York or,
Do you want
or
some
something, you know what I
Yorkie?
mean? It's just
Yeah,
yeah, it's
some
just like
York.
real.
Yorkshire.
Yeah. Um,
This is also a sequence where Billy gets a family call from his cousin, and we see that his family and the way they greet each other is about what you'd expect. Just off rip insulting each other, and they're just pretending like it's no big deal.
mhm.
Of course, this is like obviously meant to be the setup for the next issue as it's presented. Like, oh, is he going to betray him this time? Again, just I don't have too much to say about that aside from the fact that again, the family dynamic is exactly what you would expect from this
Yeah.
character.
It's
And
just
again, it
fun,
works
it's
well.
not deep, it's not nuanced, it's fun, and that there's a
Yeah.
good place for that in this kind of story. Star Wars as a whole, of course, but particularly a story where you're trying to go a little bit darker on some of the themes. You need that levity to help carry the energy through, and especially when we sort of talked about before the pacing. It's difficult to make this kind of a character who doesn't know anything about anything because he's lost his memories, being just given exposition as he goes along the different steps of his story. Even if you introduce little quirk elements of kind of the detective side of things to help that, you still need something to
Mhm.
kind of keep the energy going and keep the momentum of the story going in the background for readers. So I thought it was an excellent choice, even if it is a
Yeah,
bit
and
simple.
yeah, and then that leads us to them going to Ryloth. I really like just the look that they of Ryloth, like
Oh yeah,
particularly
I was gonna
Mm.
in
say
like
that.
the underground catacomb. They put a lot of detail into like the catacombs and stuff, and like the shipping lanes and all that. It does feel very distinct, and I really like that. It does
Um,
because like one of the first things you probably think of in this era to draw from was the stuff from Tales of the Jedi. The
Mm.
yeah,
redemption
sure.
arc with Ulick and stuff. But obviously, that was a very, very, very different time. So I like that they still made it feel like Ryloth, but obviously it's a more modernized version of it. So there's a lot more tech around, but you still have like the same sort of like big catacomb sort of thing that we're all familiar with, which is really nice. I don't know. Again, it's like small things, but I do like that continuity.
And it's tied into the theme as well. It's tied into the theme of the story.
Yeah.
I mean, putting aside the fact that you got the Twilight as part of the name of the issue, or the run, but just the ideas it's being played with, the concept of light and dark, and the dangerous route, or the safe route between, and all that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
It's light, and it's not again very deep, but it's just another little arrow in the quiver for the story to work
Yeah.
with.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
this is also
I
where we're
love
introduced to Voss's cousin, what was her name again?
Asante, something like that.
Asante, yeah.
Um,
Monte
but
Voss. Which I
yeah,
also another thing too, I like the fact like she does just come out of nowhere and recognize him, and I like again, it's kind of a bait and switch because you would think, oh, probably Tinte like talked to her, so that's probably what she knows. But at the same time, you later learn, oh, she's here because she was part of the whole conspiracy. But I like how, again, even knowing the twist going into it, I like how the fact that it's set up in a way where if you don't know and you just see her show up, you don't immediately think, "Oh, she's evil." You know,
Yeah,
again,
it's
little
kind of
things
funny
that I really
because
appreciate.
everyone he associates with is in on the conspiracy, pretty much. So
Yeah,
everybody he meets along the way is part. Is are you part of it?
yeah.
Is kind
Also,
of happening around.
she makes such an earnest effort from the get-go to be compassionate towards him, so you don't
Mm,
immediately think that she is on it, because again, the first thing she's like, "Oh, man, you lost your memory, that's terrible," sort of thing. Again, it's subtle, but I do appreciate it because
mm.
you're not it might not be your first instinct to think that she's in on it the way that it's set up.
Mm. Good choice of having the first Twilight character being the uncle as well, because it immediately
Yes,
lowers
Paul
suspicion,
Secura.
instinctive suspicion of the character for you as a reader. It's a clever way of guiding that, given
Mhm,
all of the obvious cues that are going to be coming up very soon afterwards
yeah.
to raise that suspicion.
Well, at the same
well, the
time,
way
though,
his character is
I like
framed is pretty obvious. You know what I
Mm,
mean? Just like
I was
exactly.
about to
every
say
position
he's
he's
one of the
ever in.
yeah, he's kinda one of the first where you start to suspect, and I like the fact that
Mm,
they kinda ratchet that up with the way that he's speaking. It's like, "Oh, you found nothing, period. Nothing,
mm,
period." Again, it's like something's clearly off with this, but
yeah.
you're not entirely sure from the get-go. This is also where we get the sequence we were talking about earlier where Quinlan's kinda, like, scanning the room with his psychometry, and he real because Paul's like, "Oh, you can stay in the same room that you stayed with last time you were here," but then Quinn's like, "Well, I can't detect anything."
Mm,
Um, and obviously his cousin's like, "Well, maybe it faded with time." It's like, if it had faded that long, I like how this ties back to the lightsaber. It's like, "Oh, if
yes.
that were the
Yeah.
case, I wouldn't have gotten anything from mine and, Ayla's lightsabers either." I love the fact that that initial setup and payoff from the sabers and the fact that it adds an extra layer to this.
Completely agreed. Yeah, it's again like Matt said before. It's another little detail of the detective note. It's a good clue to have that logical conclusion be. Well, I wouldn't have detected anything from the lightsabers if I'd been like in the state for a year.
Mhm.
It has to have been relatively recently. So therefore, I
Al
know that this
also
negative space is relevant to my case.
yeah. Also, when she, like, tells him, like, "But that doesn't make sense. Why would Paul be in us?" And he just starts laughing because he's just, like, so, like, "Nothing makes sense." Like, he genuinely
Mm,
looks kind of, like, unhinged. In fact, I love the fact because when he starts laughing and you see her in the background, she looks genuinely, like, afraid of him for a second there as he starts kinda just, going into that mode because it's so from out of nowhere. And again, it kind of plays to the idea like again, what is a Jedi when you take away
mm,
his morals? What is a Jedi when you take away his memory? What is a Jedi when you take away what's holding him back? And she looks genuinely intimidated there. And the fact that he's literally just yelling like my life is gone exclamation point. It's like, ooh, that hits really hard. Again,
mm.
character voice in this sequence is very on point.
I really just like love Ryloth as a setting. I like that this I don't know that I knew about these before this comic, but like the floating rock garden kind of a thing. It's
It's a
like
really
it's
cool idea,
very
isn't
like
it?
yeah,
It
and
looks
like just
cool.
the idea that like I mean presumably they just mean like they say any Twi'lek can come and fuddle around with them and just like
Mm,
rearrange them if they want, but most people are just content to leave them be. I mean it implies that you can somehow reach them without like the force and just like they kind of respond to just normal touch or something like that.
yeah.
I just think it's like a kind of a fun I don't know what I'm talking about when I say Zen, but kind of like a Zen garden idea. I don't really know what
Mm.
that means. Sorry if that's inaccurate or offensive or whatever for all the Zen practitioners who listen to us. But anyway, like I love also the fact that like Ryloth is a place or a planet that's like one half of it is always like in darkness and the other side is like brightly exposed, like brightly lit desert. I love
Mhm.
any setting where like like dwellings and cities like carved into mountains. That's just something that I think is really
Mm.
fun and awesome. And also just like you mentioned the Tales of the Jedi arc or like redemption. Like I love that it's almost like a comedic bit in the middle of like really a serious story. Because the first time you're here, if you're reading things from like the beginning is kind of like Silvar. Sylvar, who's like one of my favorite characters. She kind of goes on a bender. This is like in the wake of the Exar Kun war, which we will cover someday. I know we keep promising that we'll get around to it.
It's only because we've
commit
already
to
done it
doing
once and then it failed. So
yeah, let's commit to doing it at some point this year.
We will
won't
do
say
it this
when,
year,
but we'll do it at some point this year. So anyway, but so she, over the course of that war, she like lost her mate and also her mentor, and friends besides, and her mentor, I mean her mate, actually like betrayed her and everybody. So it was like a really deep loss and everything. So she, not so much like I'm gonna join the Sith, but she was just kind of like on one, like really like lost from like the heartbreak and like the trauma of like the whole experience. So she kept like running into like people who were trying to help her. Like she talked to like a priest from her own native world, and that didn't work. A Jedi tried to help her, a Twi'lek named Tat Danita, and he brought her here. He's like, come on, you know what us girls need? We need a mental health day. We need like a spa day or something like that. And so he's in the middle of like meditating and like getting a facial and whatever. Like he's centered and everything. Like he's calm, he's manifesting and everything like that. And she like wanders off page and like immediately gets like embroiled in like a labor dispute and starts like a violent riot.
Literally.
Or something. So it's just like
Right
like,
into it.
this was supposed to be a spa day. Like so I just like it's funny in the middle of like what's really like one of the more serious like arcs with like some actual weight
That's
and
just
gravity
like,
to it.
doing all this.
But anyway, because of those things, I've always had like a soft spot for Ryloth. I love an excuse to come back here. But same thing. This garden area, it's supposed to be like this tranquil meditative exercise, and here we are fucking around with spiders and drugs. It's just nothing ever goes right. So
I like how Vinny's like that as well. Like, are you sure you want to be going in here? I'm not sure about this. He said it was abandoned mine, friend. I love it. It's brilliant. So yeah, the general mystery of the story is kind of coalescing quite well here. You get a sense of for me anyway, the pacing felt like it was a little bit more rushed at this stage because we're having to fit so much in with the dark side, the internal struggle of Voss, the revelation of the more remote parts of the memories coming back with everything with Aayla, etc.
Yeah.
I felt like it was a little bit burdensome and could probably have done with one more issue to its name to help kind of split those two
we
sides
immediately
off
go into the caves after that.
Yeah, exactly. Like just
we
time to focus on the mystery aspect and then time to focus on the memory aspect. Like I feel like that could have been a better served that way, but even so, it works very well. It's only kind of the minor little bits and quirks that kind of slip through the gaps, really. Things like Asante, we don't really have enough time to care about her and her subsequent loss.
No, I agree with that. I don't think that this, in that sense, I think that it's kind of lacking like a powerful conclusion.
Yeah,
like, in a way, like it's not incomplete. But it does have that kind of pilot vibe. Like this is a good episode. It's like it's serviceable at that point.
Yeah. Just everything with like the torture of Paul, etc. Just even the fact that Aayla, the fact that Billy mentions this, like you just accidentally made Aayla kill her uncle with a force power that she does not understand, and you want to go and talk. Like obviously he's doing that for his own gains, saying that, but it's also kind of right, Aayla, the last we see of her in this, she runs off page, having just killed her uncle by accident, trying to stop her master from killing anybody. Or hurting him even. That's but we don't feel a coalescence of the emotional kind of narrative theme around that point. It's very much just a thing that happens and will hopefully be dealt with later on the line. That could have been like a really powerful conclusion to the story. Even like a first step in his, well, it kind of was his first step into I'm going to go back to the Jedi and learn.
I always forget that this doesn't involve like directly the events of like darkness. In my head, it's all one big story, but it is kind of weird that I think it probably would have worked better that way if it was part of like a large graphic novel, with like a beginning, middle, end, as opposed to being sort of. I mean, they are stitched together and not loosely. Like one series does lead into the next, but technically this was like folded into the events of like what's going on with other Jedi that I just wasn't reading in order at the time, because it includes things like emissaries to Malastare and other stories we've already talked about, the Hunt for Aurra Sing, things like that. But it is a little. I think just a little structurally weak. Maybe it bit off a little bit more than it could chew for like its introduction and everything, or it didn't quite tie things up together as nicely as it could have. But that's where we see all these things up their game. They do pay off forward.
Yeah, but even saying that, like this is all behind the scenes stuff. Like the fact that this wasn't written in conjunction with everything that immediately followed, and it was just let's paint on a blank canvas and give ourselves some space to work with later on. I mean, we call this disjointed, and it is, but the fact that it's so little disjointed is something to its credit, in my opinion, because they didn't have what was going to come after this. It wasn't like ready to plug in. by the nature of the medium, by the nature of the fact the other films hadn't come out, by the nature of the fact they hadn't developed the media project quite as much as they will in a few short years after this, they could not make it as tightly knit as we were asking them to without just reframing the whole approach to the work. So it's a point to its credit as much as it is criticism. But it is a little bit of the friction there where it could have been stronger if it just had
what you're speaking to there, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to talk over that.
That's right.
What you're speaking to there, I think, is kind of like maybe perhaps a little bit unintentionally. It lends to that element of realism of being dropped into somebody's like story in this. I mean, it's a haphazard story because he. I don't mean to say like the writing on this level. It's purposely sort of like what the fuck. Like I'm waking up with amnesia. And I don't know what's going on, right? So it does feel a little bit. There's an element of flaw here. There's also an element that feels very natural.
Yeah, it lends
so it
itself,
kind of like it kind of works. You know,
kind of flying by the seat of your pants sort of experience that ties to the root of the character's
perspective. That's Quinlan's middle name. Flying
for sure.
Yeah. But even like just dialing back to like the Asante like cave stuff for a second. Also, Billy kills his cousin very very casually.
very casually.
You just killed your cousin. His side of the family and mine never got along. As he's literally taking money from his dead cousins.
Also, big bet.
Yeah, exactly. More of that. But again, like when they're in the cave, like after they fought the spiders, that's where we learn, of course, that Asante was the one who ambushed, Voss and Aayla and helped come up with the idea to feed them to. Was it glitterol? It just doesn't. It doesn't just like roll off the tongue so easily to wipe their memories because they figured, if they can't remember, they won't be a threat. Because the original order was to kill them. But also, I will say this: it is interesting how the two individuals who tried to save them were people related to them, even though they're not good people. Interesting dynamic there because Voss's cousin and obviously Ayla's uncle, being the kind of wants to suggest this. Again, I guess you could say maybe there was a bit of care there. But even then, like Asante says, like she claims that like she did care about Voss, but she just, one betrayal led to the next. I feel like maybe if we had gotten again, like you were saying earlier, Matt, about this being a bit more stretched out, if we had kind of gotten to know Asante a little bit more, I feel like maybe that portrayal could have landed a little harder, even though as it's presented, I do think functionally it does everything well. I don't know. You guys,
it's very. I think you're right. I think that if this was taking place over the course of like a novel, say, and you just there's your thumb, and she had more time to like develop, I think that is true. But I think there is just like a challenge of like it's more the time that it's the time frame in which they're operating together. It's very hard for an amnesiac to feel betrayed, right? Because he's just rereading who she is, right?
And therefore the reader to care about said betrayal as well.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, he does react very emotionally to that.
Sure.
And, him sort of resolving to go after Paul Secura. I mean, the next issue literally has him quite literally blowing the doors off his house to just interrogate him. So there's definitely like the emotionality is there. I feel like if we had gotten a little bit more time to really get to know this character and really show, because like again, it's framed in a way where you can logically assume that she genuinely regrets this. But at the same time, maybe if we'd gotten a bit more confliction from her, maybe it could have landed a little far. And I'm not even saying that that's an objective flaw. It really is.
I think I think what you're saying is perfectly valid. What it is like what saves it is that the character's feelings aren't in doubt. Like they have a right to their feelings. It's just how the reader feel that the reader probably won't feel that strongly about that betrayal because it's over and done with over the course of 5 minutes, relatively speaking. But it works within the context of the story. It's not cheap or poorly done or anything. So
no, I mean, it's a technical flaw in that we don't get to.
No, I was agreeing with you. I was not correcting you. What you're saying when you were kind of peeling off calling it a flaw, I get it because it's not really objectively like a terrible flaw or anything like that.
It's one of those things where it's a technical flaw, but it just doesn't matter that much because of the things that it is doing right. In particular, we don't care about the betrayal, but we do care about the fact that very emotive, very instinctually driven, very much I care about the people around me. Voss is diving to her to kind of hold her as she dies and sort of like feel that loss there. So we feel the loss rather than the betrayal. And technically, you could also feel the betrayal as well if it was a better developed story with a different format, different time frame, whatever. But that doesn't matter because it's not the point. The point is where we go.
It's a very case by case thing, right?
Yeah, it really is.
I mean, if you think of like television, You can think of like an episode of something where we just looked at what do you call it, Dark Empire,
Mm.
right? And like Luke kind of has like the glimpse of like a romance that doesn't end up going anywhere in that.
Mm.
I don't think anyone's broken up about that, and at the same time, the way that it's handled within the story is not exactly poor. And I'm saying that about Dark Empire story,
Yeah,
I don't
exactly.
like, right? There's
Yeah.
there's nothing especially poor about that element of it, but I'm not thinking about it.
Mm.
Meanwhile, and it's not all just a question of time. It's just some of it is level of personal investment. Some of it
Hmm.
is just it's very difficult to say because I can think of like if you think about Batman the animated series, that episode where Tim Drake like runs into the girl who's connected with Clayface.
Mm.
No direct spoilers, but I mean that's like heartbreaking. That's one episode thing. It's
Mm.
perfect. It's like a 22-minute thing and it's unforgettable. It's like I can't.
That's probably the good comparison then, because it's how central it is to the story, the core story.
Yeah,
This is very much a
yeah,
tangential aspect of something that has nothing to do with his overall character, nothing to do with his
yeah.
overall run of issues. You can easily forget about this and nothing about the story changes. That's the thing. If it was trying to sell it as this great betrayal like tragedy, then this would be a
Mhm.
critical flaw, because it's not, and
Yeah.
it's only a tangential aspect of it. It's just
Right.
very forgivable, and you move on and you forget about it. It's that's kind of the main thing. On top of the things
Yeah.
we've already talked about with the weaknesses of the medium, weaknesses of the time frame with how they were working, all that kind of
Mhm.
stuff, that smooths over it quite nicely. Coupled with
Right.
the fact, of course, that the other half of this, the mystery unraveling plot stuff doesn't have that much time to shine, but the emotional scrambling to kind of resonate with his memories side, that does get a bit more time and is the more interesting and more powerful and more thematically central
Mhm.
aspect of the story, which is
Yeah.
really strong in how he deals with Paul. The only thing I have to say on this in the negative space is I wish we'd had just a half an issue's more content to properly explore the Aayla connection, because Aayla, until we move on with the following issues and following run after this, is barely here. It's we're not getting enough from in my mind to kind of properly
Mhm.
squeeze out all the dramatic juice from Voss's personal reaction to having seen her, and then react to her reacting to him, etc. All of this going on right
Yeah.
now, it's all from the Voss side of things, which again makes
Yeah.
sense, needs to be that way, but we could have had more Aayla here to kind of properly, bridge the
Well, do
two
you
halves
think
coming together, kind of part of the equation.
Yeah.
I was just going to ask you before you said that, would you have been open to like almost like a either an epilogue or just like a one scene thing where like you're seeing things strictly from her perspective, like just to
Yeah,
orient her in the
potentially like a
story. Yeah,
small step aside
would
in
That'd
you
be
be
POV.
open
amazing.
It
to
could have been
that?
it could have been
That'd be amazing.
a parallel story with her that they put together and make that whole. It could have been just another
Mhm.
half an issue of seeing her perspective here. They just even just an extra scene and a half within what they've already given us. Something just to make it a bit more substantial. Because as it's given, we basically see he first of all he doesn't recognize her, obviously, because
Mhm.
he's lost his memory, and the uncle quite almost comically he's like, "Do you not recognize it right here? Look!" Like staring her in the face, and we'll have to think, is it her or is it just someone he's saying it's her, etc. We have the initial reaction there where she doesn't recognize him because she's had even more of this stuff than Voss had pumped into him.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I
And
do
then
like
we
that
get
detail though.
the
I like the fact that he says very plaintively, like, I had to
yes,
give her more and more because of how like what you Jedi did to her. The way he's
yeah,
framing it. That's
I
subtle, but I like that.
yeah, it really sets up the kind of character he's going to go on to be in the future, in contrast to Voss. I really like that. But aside from that initial reaction, and then her resonance of this torture is wrong and I'm going to react to it, we don't really get anything from her side of things. And I think that we could have had more without it detracting from the main focus of the story here, and particularly given her
Yeah,
relevance moving forward.
I think you're right because on some level, uh, well, comics as a medium, they're very similar to like soap opera, right? Where the
Mm,
story keeps going, the story keeps going, right? This, you want the end of an episode to feel more like a cliffhanger, that's like by intention,
mm,
and this feels a little bit unresolved, like in a way that doesn't doesn't quite cohere to your usual idea of like fulfillment when
yeah,
when you're taking something in. So
exactly.
I think you're right. It's missing. It is just missing that little half step. It's not like it's
Yeah.
missing tons, but
Mm,
it could use just a little bit more. And I
Yeah.
think that that's one thing that again, once going deeper into it, they become like expert at like where
mm.
when
I
something
remember
ends
that
and
from
it's
what I
clearly
have read.
still
Yeah.
business.
Mhm.
There's obviously business still like left to complete, but it feels like okay, this is the proper spot to hang up the phone for now.
Mm.
Whereas in
Right.
this one, not quite.
Yeah.
I
It's a
mean, in
little
this particular instance, you mentioned the epilogue. Even just when you see Palpatine, kind of like, yes, or like, he's
yeah.
vulnerable to,
I
even just
maintain
having
I think
like,
that's a Maul thing, like
yeah,
kind of like a replacement for Maul.
Kinda
exactly.
feels that way.
Even just having a shot of Aayla like leaning against a kind of train window as she's looking out as she's leaving the city or something. Just something to show she runs off page and we don't see where she goes after that. So if just
Mhm.
something to show where she's going to be going, what she's feeling, how she's dealing
I
with whatever
was
happens, something
I
like
was gonna
that to
say,
tie into what could come later on.
Mhm.
yeah, I was gonna say I don't think that they knew exactly. I think this
Oh,
was
for
like a
sure.
trial run,
Yeah.
and certainly I'm sure that at this stage they probably had the concept of like Volfe Carco, which we won't get into today. We'll talk about that next recording. But exactly how to stitch him into like the fold of
Mm.
everything else. And what it ends up being is that that's just basically like a tangential thing that has nothing to do with anything, but with
Mhm.
purpose. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's no different than Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon going on a random adventure that doesn't directly tie into the events of the Phantom Menace.
Exactly.
But in this, it doesn't feel like they quite had the go ahead to do that yet, because that's you feel the need to kind of. I'm not offended by Sidious at the end or anything, but
Hmm.
that does kind of feel like a, well, of course, just sort of like, this is all part of one of my plans, and
Yeah.
Quinlan is connected to the events of the Sith without going into details,
Mm.
but not in that way. That's just that gets dropped, and it just feels like they didn't quite either didn't have the vision quite yet of where to take him, or didn't have the green light to go off in a different direction yet. So
Exactly.
I feel
Yeah.
like that's why it does feel a little bit kind of open door, because they weren't sure yet, or
Mm.
hadn't made the commitment just yet. But that gets resolved quick,
And
like
as,
in
and
the
as we
next
said
arcs.
before, the fact that
Yeah.
it does stitch together as well as it does is to its credit, even despite the flaws.
Yeah. Something else I just kind of wanted to like point out too, like Paul Sakura's motivations also feel a little nebulous at times because the narration very specifically states that like okay, he's a family elder and the traditions of their people is that when one of them dies, the rest get sent into the what's it called? The I don't know, basically the wastes to inevitably die so new, heads of the clans can be chosen. That's all well and good.
Terrible
It then
system, but yes.
states that yeah, what'd you say, sorry?
Terrible system, but yes, you're right.
Oh, yeah, well, it
Narratively, all
is what
well
it
and
is.
good.
Sure, sure. But it says that, like and then it very pointedly says that all of this planning with the drug and stuff and all of this, like, collusion is very intentionally done by Paul to prolong that fate. But what's weird about that is, like, the way that it's set up and what they're saying is like, "Okay, but how does him doing this very specifically keep him from getting sent into those lands?" Because you would assume, like, okay, like, even though he ends up dying, of course, if another one of the heads ended up dying, he'd still get sent there, so it's like I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, how this planning helps him avoid that doesn't necessarily come off as the clearest thing. I don't know, like, did you guys feel that way? Because to me, it just felt like, maybe could have used a little bit extra text to
I'm
explain this a little
I-
bit.
I'm with you. As I said before, it's a technical flaw I just don't care about. That's how I felt
Sure.
about this. Like
Again,
it's
nothing about it breaks the narrative for me. I
yeah,
just wanna
no,
be
no.
very
But
clear
you're
on
right
that.
though. It's a weakness. It's one of those things where you see the power of the story, you see the focus on Voss, you see all the things that matter for the most part coming together. But then there are a few little odd quirks where you could have polished up that, you could have made that better, you could have dialed that in more. All that kind of stuff. It's one of those situations where
Mhm.
at least they carried through the central kind of promise to its conclusion for the
Right.
most part. I mean, everything else is just we'll get better later on.
Yeah. The way I sort of interpreted it was like, okay, if he succeeds in this, he'll be brought into like the Senate fold because obviously a senator is like a major focal point of this. And maybe something in their like traditions means that, oh, if you represent us in the galactic government, you're exempt from that rule and a new clan head will be chosen without needing to go into the waste. That's kind of how I interpret it. But again, the story itself doesn't make that abundantly clear.
It all it
Mm.
says is like, 'cause I was just looking at the page when you were after you brought it up. All it says is that because he's a part of like a Sidious level scheme, is that he makes vague allusions to the fact, or I mean the objective text, right? Like the bubbles, the plot bubbles that are saying what's going on, which kind of like simulate his
Yeah. If I
thoughts in a
missed
way.
anything, yeah,
They basically just allude to the fact that that this scam of his that he's involved with as like a kind of low on the totem player, in the grand scheme of things, has made him powerful friends. I assume that means that he thinks that they'll shield him, they'll intervene in the system
right.
somehow. It's I agree with you. I also feel like it's more fleshed out than like the Trade Federation's reason for doing what they do in
Oh
the
yeah.
film. You know what I mean? For example,
Yeah, yeah.
Hard not
That
to be
is
though
fair.
on that one. To be fair.
That is
of
very
course,
fair.
but
Yeah.
it's because that's just not there. This
Mm.
they gesture at some sort of larger idea. We just don't really get the details, and he obviously, gets cut off at the
Again, another
knees. So
one of just many ways Plagueis does a lot of heavy lifting for the broader lore.
Mm.
yeah, you kind of get uh like outright replacements for him in the form of other characters whose names I can't necessarily summon right now, but there are other peons who very obviously or effectively like serve the same function he could have had he gone on to remain as a character,
Yeah.
with these same two characters. I mean to say, like playing similar
Right.
roles as that. So
Yeah.
he's
I mean,
sort of
we even later learn that this guy has a brother, so it's like who, we
yeah.
see in a later story arc who doesn't quite, fit the same role, but a similar mold in a sense. But again, we'll get
Mhm.
that to that when we get to that. I'm just
Mm.
saying like that's something I feel like maybe like again, it by no means breaks the emotionality of this sequence. Just maybe one extra box of text could have maybe been needed to kind of flush that out a little bit more. But as for the actual meeting itself too, like again, we sort of spoke on to like, the Aayla not recognizing Voss and his frustration at that. And that eventually builds into like this torture sequence where I will say this, like the ramping up of tension, it really does feel like this is something Voss has just been holding inside of him for so long. And
Mm.
again, I don't know if it's intentional, but the fact that this is expressed in him summoning force lightning. I think it's a really good way of visually showing to us, like, okay, this is all of his inner darkness, all of his frustration, all of his, wanting revenge, just coming out of him, and quite literally manifesting in one of the most primal expressions of the dark side that you can get. And again, I don't know if that's intentional, but I love how you can frame it that way, and I think it really works.
Mm.
I don't know. I don't know what they cooked up in their mind as far as like what his objective backstory was going to be. Like, I don't know if they knew from the get go what this character's origin was. You know what I mean? Because we see it eventually. We'll not get into the details of it now in case people are reading along with us and on the off channel. And obviously, we want to let Callan see it with fresh eyes and with full context.
Mm.
But he has most Jedi from this era, they kind of come with like the stock story of either an orphan or just found at like an early age and gets picked up by the Jedi because they're found to be force sensitive, and by tradition, the Jedi usually forbid or at the very least discourage contact with like the family. His story is more traumatic than that, and you get the full details of it like later on.
Oh yeah.
So I think I don't if they could have had that idea because and just with the idea of we'll get to it when we get to it. You know, we don't
Mm.
know when, we don't have like a strict time frame, but they might have had that from the get go. If they did, then certainly this is a character who's been sitting on like a lot of baggage or sitting
Yeah.
with a lot of baggage
Buried
and it's ready
trauma.
to come out.
Mhm.
So yeah, and
Go back
also
to the
just
old
because it's kind of earned in this story because you spoke to it earlier with him being unhinged in the Asante scene where he's talking about how nothing makes sense. That's him getting tired and just frustrated with
Mm.
the
Mhm.
process of trying to figure this all out. So it's kind of earned anyway without knowing the details of his childhood. But yeah, I mean he's just kind of allowing himself to cut loose because he's angry. And
Yeah.
obviously in Star Wars, that means that the dark side is at work on some
Mhm.
level, like you're
You're
part
channeling it through
puppeteer
that.
and
You're
part just
open
giving
to
into
Yeah.
it.
yeah, exactly. That's the thing we've always liked, the fact that it's duality of both. You are
Yeah.
the source and the kind of puppet.
Puppeteer and puppet. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
And him literally, like, strangling him with his own Leku as he's
Wait, yeah, he threatens to
simultaneously
do it, like
Yeah.
just saying
tossing
it.
him
Yeah. Aside from
with light.
doing it, saying threatening, this is what I'm going to do to you. Like that's very
Yeah.
yeah, because
Like,
it's
when
more
Voss
than just primal. He's doing it by intention.
Mm.
Mhm.
Um,
Like this, like, Voss genuinely looks, like, kind of intimidating here when he's,
oh yeah,
really just
kind
letting.
of. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, when he's just letting loose in his, like, totality, like, even Villy's like, "He gave you the information, you can stop." And this is from Villy, mind you, the guy who we literally just saw gun down his own cousin in the previous, issue. So the fact that even he's kinda taken aback by this just raw display of power and just this anger and just this unhinged nature, again, it's saying a lot with a little and just letting the panels speak for themselves without necessarily needing to put in, dialogue at every angle. And again, of course,
Yeah.
and it's such a dramatic display that this is ultimately the impetus for Ayla kind of, as we mentioned before, trying to save her uncle and inadvertently ending up killing him in the process, you know?
Yeah, it's kind of like
Yeah.
that the perfect storm for that reductive adage of like hurt people hurt people. Just
Yeah.
this person with trauma, this person with this baggage from this past, but also in modern age post amnesia, all of this friction he's been dealing with all this up to this point. The shock and awe of Aayla, who's been pushed even further than that with the repeated
Mhm.
abuse and doses of this stuff. Like, they're just like, what's going on? This is wrong. I don't like. I want this to stop. I want in Voss's expression, it's I want control of the situation. I want to punish you. I want to make you feel bad the way you're making others feel bad. In hers, it's just I just want this to stop. And it's just that blast of power that does actually end up instantly killing her uncle from the fall. It's a really powerful like first step on her continuing journey, and I really look forward to see how that's played with in the early issues that we move on to past this point.
Yeah, and again, it's tragic, but it makes sense, like from her perspective, like why things went the way they did, because she is seeing this, and it's not like she has like conscious control over her powers anymore. So the fact that it is just such a blatant, just lash out, I just want this to stop. Yeah, like you see where she's coming from, and when she makes a run for it, because she again realizing what she inadvertently did. Again, Billy sums it up like you just made her kill her own uncle. How do you think she's feeling right now? So
Yeah.
again, even though we don't get character, again, her reaction in this sequence, I think makes sense, in the sense of how it is set up.
And it sure has had a good hook for where these characters are going to be moving forward as well. Like I say,
Yes.
even if we don't think the character points are as quite as seamless as they otherwise could be in a different context, people who read this are going to want to read to see what happens next, if it's in the context of like a whole trade paperback or a collection or whatever. So yeah, the writers did their job. And again, the artwork is just spectacular for all of this. Really helps sell the horror of the actual story context involved.
So this leads us into the final issue and the final sequence of events, which takes place on Coruscant, with Quinlan Voss and Villy going to after someone in he's either a senator or he's in like the senator's employ. His name's Chomfrey. What was it again? Chomfrey.
Is it Chomfrey Ka? Something like that?
Chomfrey Ka, yeah.
Sounds right.
His name sounds almost sounds very much like Ornfrey Ta, even though that's not who it is. Who is the senator at the time? Maybe that's who they originally thought it was going to be. Is like, wait, no, I guess not. Maybe there was a change at the last minute.
Well, they might not have had permission to use like a character who shows up in the film, so like in a way that might have seen him, be sentenced to jail or what ends up happening to him. Does he die in this? Like I can't remember.
I think they just bring him in. Voss tries to kill him, but Mace stops him. Speaking of Mace, we get Mace Windu in full. He basically contacts Quinlan Voss and basically kind of introduces himself, tells him. I do like right off the bat, like you do get a sense of history between these two, even if you didn't read Emissaries and Assassins, obviously where they talk. But because when Quinlan gets his lightsaber back in issue 1, like with his psychometry, one of the first people he sees is Mace Windu. So again, you get the sense that this is somebody who they have some history, even if they maybe weren't just like friends or anything. But I do like the fact that that initial setup, it's not just out of the blue. So I do appreciate that.
Callan, even though that setup was out of the blue, like just ironically enough, because that bit on Nar Shaddaa had nothing to do with the rest of Emissaries of Master.
Yes,
it was like, let's get off this shit and get onto our new main character. So exactly. Like ironically enough, it's not this story's fault, but that was funny.
But Callan, you were speaking earlier that you really like Mace's characterization in this issue.
Yeah, well, I mean, the fact that he has any, for starters, is pleasant. I mean, like I said before, they're taking the voice, the affectations, the general mannerisms, etc., of what we were given in the films, which is basically nothing, and they're applying it through what little lens they have at this stage in the settings kind of history, which is very little. How do we somehow extract a character from that? Generic Jedi traits with portrayal as in the film. This is the best we see of it in the comics, in the stories, in the stuff up to this point. For my
I would not care about Mace Windu if it hadn't been for James Luceno, Matthew Stover, and this creative team.
Exactly.
Like outside of those works,
they're that responsible for it. As simple as that. And even here, when they have basically nothing to work with, and they hadn't yet been given the creative license to push further with their own ideas and concepts, as they will get the license to do later on. Here is enough to respect the character, and here is enough to get behind what he's saying. The addressing of the bats as they fly through. I'm not going to hurt you. Sorry for scaring you, from disturbing you from your sunboats, that kind of thing. That I'm not going to fight you.
He calls them small brothers. I love that bit of dialogue.
Exactly.
Like his connection to all things. Like it's very Mace, particularly again. Like you like that's a line you could easily see him using in the Shatterpoint novel. Like
exactly.
It flows.
Right.
It really flows nicely. And the fact that I'm not going to fight you. I'm not here to save him. I'm here to save you. This is stuff we've seen in other things, but it's nice to see it from Mace, particularly given the fact that he's supposed to have a leadership role within this order. It's supposed to mean something to this character specifically as well. Like, it's just it's all very effective to me, and for someone who hadn't seen Mace Windu be that this early in the series very much, it was nice to get the first glimmer of it.
Yeah, Very minor point. Is this the first time we ever see Mace Windu in a lightsaber duel?
Probably.
Probably not. Like,
I mean, he's fought before,
With
but a
in
lightsaber duel?
I mean, when was he?
in a duel with another Force adept. I feel like
Yeah,
this
no, but
might have been the first time.
when was he training with Say team?
That
That's
was
in the
later
next
on,
arc
wasn't
after
it?
this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's in the arc after this. Okay, all
Mm.
right.
Sorry, that's
So
yeah, that's what I'm
because the
saying.
art's really bad in that. But anyway, so
Compared to
but
this, yeah.
Well, yeah, we'll get to that,
no
but
offense to whoever drew that, but I mean it's not gender sequence. But I mean to say or at least in my memory it's not.
because I can't
But
think of any
that
like piece of like lore like before this because like he doesn't duel anybody in emissaries and assassins. He
I
doesn't.
don't think that element of his character was a thing until like Attack of the Clones was getting ready to roll out in terms of
Mm.
him being like one of the best duelists and all the rest of it. All you kind of had was like he's like quote unquote leader of the Jedi Council, which kind of is like Yoda. His title, Master of the Order, right,
Mm.
was Mace, right? Like and so the idea it feels kind of more ceremonial because obviously Grandmaster Yoda is like the head honcho and
Actually
everybody
running the
defers
show,
to him and
yeah.
he's been around forever. Mace's role is kind of like I lead the proceedings of the council, and I have a very senior position, and I have oversight over a broad range of things, including handing out missions, like is like
Mhm,
whether that's trials of knighthood, for example, or just more sensitive tasks and things like that.
mhm,
But again, it just a lot of that was kind of underdeveloped. I mean, the Jedi full stop are underdeveloped in the actual films. You know what I mean?
Mm.
So there's precious little to work with there. Everything else, I think that's kind of why you started off with like Kiadi Mundi say, who isn't like the most natural choice, but they were just grasping at like let's get somebody doing something. You know what I
Mm.
mhm.
mean? The characters I don't think really existed until like the EU made like the fleshed out ideas of them didn't really exist until they kind of like were allowed to come to the fore in
Yeah.
these various contexts. So I guess it is the first time you see him in a duel. But
It is
yeah,
interesting too, because like the way he does fight Voss, because like Voss is like very angry and he's just trying to get past him, and like again, it's like obviously like the whole Vopad thing wasn't a factor in this, but it is surprisingly consistent. Like even with the bats, like Mace is just Voss is throwing all this darkness and anger at him, and Mace is just flowing through, not touching him,
Mm.
defend, counter. He's just again, he's taking all of Voss's darkness and just shuffling it to the side, which is very Mace, and
Mm.
ultimately, because Voss just can't get past him because he is the wall against darkness. So again, retroactive, but it is nicely consistent with Mace. Again, it feels very Mace for him to
Yeah.
fight
yeah,
like that.
And very Jedi to win without winning as well. Just saying no, I'm not going to fight you, and that giving him the victory he needs, and trying to bring him from the dark.
Mhm.
Again, like I said before, we've seen it before. I'm not trying to save you. I'm not trying to save him. I'm trying to save you. That's something that comes up in a million, dime a dozen in various different stories. But
Mhm.
it's so Jedi and so kind of speaks to the kind of role of leadership that Mace
Mhm.
represents within the Order. Even at this point in the story,
Yeah.
when we barely know anything about him, it just fits really nicely, and it really helps
Yeah.
give you that kind of bridging point between where Voss is now and where Voss will be in the starting point of the next few issues.
Yeah. Also, because like they end up betraying, like because they initially like Billy has like this plan where he pretends to give Voss to that corrupt senator or senator staffer again, but ultimately it's a trap. Again, Billy's lines, if there's one thing I've learned is not to bet against Jedi, especially this Jedi. Love it. Again, character
Mm.
voice in that, saying a lot with a little.
I love the
yeah,
fact that his signature move is to just do this exact same thing every single time and it works.
Yeah, I
So
know.
that's just comedically that's amusing.
Yeah.
But also, again, going to a purely technical flaw that doesn't really matter at all. He only was defeated by Voss in the context where he was trying to oppose him himself like once. So the whole I've learned never to bet against this guy. Like you've been helping him every step of the way since. If you hadn't been, it would have gone very poorly. Like I wasn't quite sold by that. But the idea behind it, what it's supposed to mean, I
yeah.
fully enjoyed for the
That's a
character.
commercial. That's
Yeah,
like a
Yeah.
commercial choice. Like
yeah,
here's our new character kind of a thing. Like
exactly. Yeah.
it's a little hokey, like end of episode kind of like if it was a
Mm.
cartoon show or something. But it's fine. It's
Yeah,
fairly harmless. But I
exactly.
get what you mean. It is
Yeah.
technically there. I will say like on the point of like Mace's characterization, I think in the Phantom Menace he's not a dick. He's just a cardboard box. You know what I mean? Like he doesn't do anything mean or inappropriate he's just sort of
Cardboard
a blank
cutout, like you
slate the
said.
way
Yeah.
Yeah.
almost all the Jedi are. I mean, Qui-Gon doesn't exactly come off like this great guy. He's just the only
Or
reason why we
Obi-Wan.
like him is, oh no,
Mm.
you know.
Obi-Wan.
But it's
Obi-Wan's
just
barely
like
a character in Phantom Menace.
Yeah.
I feel like if you're looking at Mace through Anakin's eyes, that's where he comes off as cold and kind of like a dick. But also Anakin's a dick. So like I mean it's when it's a pot calling the kettle black, right?
Mm.
But if you if objectively I get what you're going for. Like, you know, when you portray him that way, he's
Mm.
like he doesn't like Anakin, and the enmity is there by intention. It's not just it's not only a product of poor storytelling. There should be a clash of personalities there.
Mm.
But generally speaking, when you look at like a lot of the earlier material, he is pretty much like a model Jedi. When you think of like not Tales of the Jedi, but like the Star Wars tales, there are a few of those about him, and in those, there's no hint of him being like this harsh taskmaster who can't ever be pleased or anything. He's pretty stock, just kind of stock Jedi,
Yeah.
but like a good person. I mean to
Very
say.
cerebral.
Um,
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, and then like he comes alive in the works of Matthew Stover. James Luceno also
Big
does a good job. He doesn't misuse the character, but Stover's the one who made him like iconic.
Mm.
I don't feel like the 2008 series was interested in him at all. I would almost
It's
go so far as to
barely
the
in it.
only
I mean,
I
explanation
would
for what they did with him. Yeah.
I would
he's
almost go
barely even in it.
I would go so far as to say that they either didn't understand him or they just didn't care to try. Like, I mean, because he is a terrible character, but I would, to me, most of the Jedi are, in that portrayal. I that's one thing. That's one of the reasons why I don't like that show is I
Mm.
can't stand the Jedi. But I also don't like that portrayal of the galaxy and just sort of like the kiddish flavor. Because this, like I said, this is very much like playing to like a teenage young audience, like a youngish
Mm.
crowd, right? But I don't feel like this is a children's story, and this is like the again opening remarks. We're barely out of the gates here. It only gets darker and more
Mhm.
serious and more
Mm.
and just better. It's not necessarily because it's dark, but it just doesn't feel the need to like you know
Shy away from it. Yeah.
um
Yeah.
yeah
They
yeah.
definitely set, like, the precedent for, like, the sort of trajectory of their tone with this story, like, from the get-go. That's another thing that's worth praising about it too. Like, it's still there is that consistent through line, even though there will be a lot of changes that will come.
I would
Mm.
like to say just on that point of what we're all just speaking to before we deviate from it again. Quinlan is a great character, but like I said, this series just becomes great like full
Across the
stop.
board.
And
Yeah.
one of the reasons why I love it is because I'm as somebody who's not in love with NJO. Not that there's anything wrong with it. It's just I prefer the vibe of. I like the political setting.
You
I like all
dare!
that stuff. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's but I'm getting more attached to it as we go through it together, right?
Mm.
But I think that wasn't a part of my experience growing up because that was very much stuff I just only ever looked at it in a cursory way. Um, I read a fair amount of it, but it wasn't my sweet spot. The Old Republic was, but this portrayal of the Jedi, like I like these people. You know, it's the only thing that makes me the this and a select few novels, many of which we've already talked about on this channel. They're the only thing that makes me sad. Like with Order
Mm,
66, if it was
Mm.
just left to the
yeah.
films, then whatever. Like I mean, John Williams
They
sells it,
aren't
but
characters in the
that's it.
films.
Yeah,
All we get are like
Yeah,
three people, barely.
yeah.
You
for
don't
real.
know who Aayla Secura are, who Plo Koon are is. Who
Yeah,
any of
this
them
is
are.
the start of it
It's
in many
what makes
Yeah,
ways
it,
because
yeah.
we had praise for earlier arcs,
for
but
sure. Yeah.
some of them I don't even know were technically a part of this series. Like it's like Jedi Council Acts of War that might have been like its own kind of standalone thing. That's really splitting hairs because it's all
Mm.
part of the same mythos and everything.
Yeah.
But this is like the start of again like what I consider the golden age, and this is still like kind of like
Yeah.
sort of silver. Like, we're not quite golden
Mm.
yet, but we're only a
Yeah.
few issues away. You know.
It's
Um,
like it's like what Ben Kenobi said to Luke on the freaking, Millennium Falcon, taking your first step into a larger world, because it
yeah.
does very
Mm.
much feel like, the introduction, like to what they want to ultimately expand into this like broader narrative with these characters. And obviously we're going to get a lot more characters in the following arcs that will become staples. I mean, we talked about Foam, we talked about Trassa.
Yeah.
Obviously they're not in this, but like, they're going to be introduced shortly thereafter. So again, the fact that it all connects to itself in a way that will go on to be so consistent, it's very great
Mhm.
to see, you know?
Yeah.
and we're doing it in lockstep with their new main character they're pushing, because he doesn't know any of it himself either. So it's a good choice there.
Well, it's a
Getting
nice
it right from the
the
start.
way that you put it as well. It's like he doesn't feel like he's forced on us, does he?
Yeah,
He's quite welcome. You know what I
yeah,
mean?
No.
Like
no,
you don't feel like
exactly,
he's
yeah.
pushed onto you.
This is definitely much what they're doing. They are pushing him to, like,
Yeah.
we want to sell
Yeah.
this guy as someone you want to
Yeah.
come to watch, his story for.
Yeah.
It's the good natured commercialism. It's when it's creative
Yeah.
and commercial coming together, as we've talked about before. It's not. It's Star Wars is quite good at that, to be fair, broadly speaking. It's
Mhm.
not a crime as long as you do it well, and they definitely
Yeah.
are going to be doing it well. So, very much looking
Absolutely.
forward to seeing how that develops as we go through the issues moving forward over the next few weeks and months. This entire era, I mean, I've very, like I said before, scattershot as to what I've seen and what I've read and what I know about. So, looking forward to getting to dive into it properly, all the bits I'm missing. And yeah, I hope you guys have enjoyed our discussion of this first issue on that journey. Let us know in the comments down below what you think and what your experiences were when you first read these, etc. We've talked about with other stories. I am Callan, and I still have an outro.
I don't ever remember the order of this. This is Matt. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. It was fun to talk
Ev-
about.
Evanova 95. We hope you guys enjoyed. We'll see you guys later.
Goodbye.